The long night that never ends. Epigraph. The worst moment of grief is when you realize the world will continue without them. KX. Chapter 1. The clock that devours time. I awaken into a crushing silence. Obsidian shadows pooling on cracked plaster while a solitary rhythm hammers against my ears. The sound is not a melody but a relentless scrape, a metallic heartbeat that seems to carve into marrow. My eyes, heavy with unrest, drift toward the source, discovering a lone pendulum suspended in an emptiness that feels too thin to contain its weight. The contraption clings to rust-stained iron, its dial scarred beyond recognition. Numerals once bright now erased, leaving only ghostly gaps. Needle-like arms stretch outward, skeletal and fragile, trembling with insatiable hunger. Each oscillation releases a muted clang that reverberates through the floorboards, resounding like a predator's growl in a deserted alley. Every tick acts as a maw, inhaling fragments of yesterday, exhaling hollows where certainty once lived. Expectations dissolve into ash, hope crumbles into dust, and the cadence tears at the seams of my psyche, stitching new wounds with invisible thread. I can feel seconds being ripped from my breath, replaced by a cold vacuum that gnaws at the core of my consciousness. When I close my eyes, her final exhalation returns, looping in a perpetual whisper that threads through the ticking. The memory is a fragile filament, shimmering with the heat of last words, yet is forever tangled in the device's relentless pulsation. The sound of her departure refuses to dissipate, resonating on the edge of perception like a radio frequency caught on static. The apartment itself seems to inhale and exhale stale recollections from threadbare carpets, while battered furniture bows beneath an unseen burden. Windows stare out onto a city that continues its indifferent march, neon lights flickering obliviously, traffic humming a distant lullaby that offers no solace. Each surface wall, ceiling, door absorbs a relentless rhythm, becoming a conduit for an invasive energy. I attempt to catalog the onslaught, noting heartbeats, recording ambient frequencies, drawing diagrams that map the intrusion. Numbers and symbols crowd my notebook, but each hypothesis collapses, crumbling like brittle parchment under the weight of an unseen pressure. Logical scaffolding gives way, revealing only raw, unfiltered terror. Nightfall does not bring respite. Instead, nightmares infiltrate waking minutes, turning corridors into throats and hallways into veins that beat with the same feral cadence. Shadows elongate, mimicking the device's hands, wrapping themselves around my thoughts, smothering any flicker of hope. The blackness becomes a living entity, feeding off my fear, amplifying the clock's dominion. At the stroke of midnight, the mechanism emits a low roar that reverberates through my spine, shaking the very marrow of my being. I sense a fissure forming within, an invisible wound that widens with each relentless beat, exposing the raw interior of my identity. The pain is both physical and existential, a reminder that time is not a river, but a predator splitting open its prey. The realization settles like ash on a wind-blown plain. This relentless instrument does not merely count existence. It consumes it. It erodes my name, strips away memories, and leaves behind a sunken reverberation that lingers in the corners of every room. I stand on the precipice of annihilation, aware that the blackness within will never cease, and that the night once a fleeting interval has become an unending abyss. Chapter 2. The room that still breaths. I push the warped entryway, feeling the splintered floorboards sigh beneath my weight, as though the very foundation inhales the stale humidity that clings to my skin. A faint tremor travels up my spine, not from cold, but from the subtle rise and fall of plaster-capped walls. Each throb synchronized with a whispered rhythm that mimics a living chest. Inside, the living room into sanctuary of muted laughter is transformed into silent mausoleum. A cracked sofa, its cushions swollen with the weight of forgotten embraces, releases a faint perfume of her favorite jasmine shampoo each time I draw near. Every thread seems to shiver, recalling the cadence of her fingertips grazing a coffee mug, a gesture now encoded into the upholstery's fibers. The kitchen, once a stage for midnight pancakes, now exhales steam that carries the ghost of her humming. Stainless surfaces, dulled by a film of residue, reflect a distorted silhouette of a woman bending over a sink, pouring water that never reaches a basin. The faucet drips in uneven intervals, a metronome ringing the cadence of her last breath, each drop punctuating silent accusations. Upstairs, the bedroom's lamplit canopy bears the imprint of her silhouette in dust, a faint outline that shifts whenever I blink. The dresser, its drawer half open, creaks softly as if confessing secrets the wood has hoarded for years. Inside, a locket lies atop a stack of folded shirts, its metal surface warm, pulsing faintly like a heart that refuses to concede death. Every object, from cracked picture frame to tarnished silverware, seems to retain a fragment of her presence, replaying memory in a loop that never degrades. The ceiling fan rotates lazily, generating a low-frequency hum that resembles the sound of her breathing during sleep, a reminder that air itself can become a vessel for lingering essence. I attempt to depart, gripping the brass doorknob, only to feel resistance see an invisible hand pressing against my palm, urging me to stay. The hinge groans, producing a mournful note that blends seamlessly with the room's collective sigh. My own respiration synchronizes with the ambient oscillation, forcing me to swallow the bitter truth that this space is no longer inert architecture, but a sentient grave, inhaling my grief, exhaling my desperation. Behind me, the hallway stretches into blackness, its carpet fibers absorbing the resonance of my footsteps as though erasing evidence of my transit. Yet the doorway itself throbs, a slow beat that mirrors the cadence I hear within these walls, confirming that every escape route is merely another channel for the house's endless inhalation. I stand amid this breathing tomb, recognizing that anonymity has been replaced by a perpetual dialogue between flesh and foundation. My rhythm thunders against the plaster, a frantic drum seeking rhythm with a structure that already knows my tempo. The room does not merely contain memories. It cultivates them, feeding on each lingering thought, each unspoken apology, each suppressed scream. Finally, I surrender to the palpable exhalation, allowing the ambient air to fill my lungs, realizing that the only way forward is to merge with the very breath that keeps this place alive. My silhouette blurs against the dim glow of a dying bulb, and I become another whisper within the house's endless respiration. Chapter 3, The Last Sound She Made. I lie on the threadbare carpet, eyes fixed on the cracked ceiling, and the first resonance of her departing exhalation seizes my attention like a moth colliding with a shattered lantern. A ragged whisper, half concealed beneath the hum of the faulty ceiling fan, slides across my thoughts, punctuated by a sudden, sharp gasp that feels as if a cold blade has been drawn across a taut drumhead. Each reverberation reverberates inside the cavernous of my skull, cycling in a loop that strains the fibers of perception until the boundary between present and recollection becomes a trembling thread. The breath, a fragile sigh released moments before blackness claimed her, is disjointed, chopped into staccato fragments that rise and fall with the rhythm of an old, malfunctioning gramophone stuck on a warped groove. I try to clutch the sound, to press my palm against the invisible current. Yet it slithers away, dissolving into a static hiss that prickles the inner ear like frost on a glass pane. Behind me, the kitchen sink drips in uneven intervals, each drop mimicking the cadence of that final exhalation, a metronomic reminder that time continues to puncture the silence with its indifferent ticking. My hands tremble, knuckles whitening against a wooden armrest, while the memory folds upon itself, looping like an infinite corridor whose walls are lined with faded photographs that shift when I blink. The air grows dense, heavy with the scent of her lilac perfume, a perfume that seems to have seeped into the upholstery, the curtains, even the paint, and every inhalation pulls that fragrant ghost deeper into my lungs. I hear her voice for a fleeting second, a fragmented utterance cut short by the abrupt cessation of life, leaving a jagged rupture that reverberates louder than any scream. The sound swells and collapses, a tidal wave of acoustic fragments that surge against the fragile dam of my sanity, threatening to overflow into a maelstrom of unfiltered grief. My heart thuds in synchrony with the phantom breath, Each palpitation's a counterfeit reverberation that attempts to masquerade as her fading throb, an impostor that betrays the illusion with a cold, metallic clang. I raise my head, searching the dim hallway for a source, but the walls are mute, their plastered surfaces absorbing the resonance as though they are swallowing the last piece of her existence. Suddenly, the world narrows to a single, relentless wavering tonea broken recording looping eternally, its distortion growing louder, its fidelity degrading, until the original timbre is unrecognizable. I am left suspended in that vacuum, clutching the fragmented sound, realizing that the final exhalation has become a specter that haunts each breath I draw, a relentless reminder that some endings never truly cease. Chapter 4. The First Lie I Told Myself. I awoke in the dim bruised light of dawn, the apartment's stale air heavy with an unspoken promise that nothing would ever change. My mind, a cracked mirror, reflected a single thought. I can survive this. The phrase settled on my tongue like a bitter tonic, an affirmation I forced into existence before the world could shatter it. I told myself that sorrow was a fleeting storm, that shadows receded when the sun rose again, that time possessed a gentle hand capable of stitching torn fibers back together. The assertion drummed against the walls of my chest, each heartbeat reverberating a frantic denial that refused to be heard. I clung to the notion that pain, like a passing train, would eventually rust and halt, leaving the tracks clear for ordinary travel. The first night after the funeral, I sat on the sofa, its worn cushion still exhaling the faint perfume of the incense she adored. I whispered, "I will be okay," into the silence, imagining the words as a shield against an invisible blade that threatened to carve deeper into my psyche. My voice trembled, yet the lies stood rigid, bolted to the floorboards, refusing to wobble under the weight of raw emptiness. I imagined a future where a photograph would become a decorative relic, where her laughter would resonance only in recordings, where the ache would dull to a faint ache akin to a distant memory of a childhood scar. I painted pictures of ordinary morning's coffee steaming, sunlight streaming through the kitchen window, the radiator humming accompanying lullaby. In that mental gallery, I replaced grief with routine, hoping the substitution would erase the absence. But the apartment resisted my edits. The hallway's narrow passageways seemed to sigh each time I stepped through, as if inhaling a lie I breathed into the space. The hallway light flickered, casting intermittent shadows that mocked my optimism, reminding me that shadow lingered in corners I refused to acknowledge. The refrigerator hummed a low, mournful tone, its metallic interior reflecting my own hollowed reflection. I began to measure my days in milliseconds, counting the seconds between each breath, each heartbeat, each thud of my own footsteps on the hardwood. I told myself that if I could tally enough moments, the sum would eventually outweigh the loss. I fabricated a ledger in my mind. Day 0, Nino tears. Day 2, smile at strangers. Day 3, prepare a meal without hesitation. The ledger was a false record, a ledger of hope that glimmered only because I forced it to exist. Yet the nightly replay of the last sound she made an abrupt gasp, a soft sigh refused to be silenced by my rationalizations. It rose from the back of my throat like a phantom wind, a breath that had never fully left my ears. I told myself it was merely a reverberation, a trick of the acoustics, a residual vibration in the walls. I denied that it was a reminder, a scar that refused to scar over. My inner monologue transformed into a courtroom, with one side presenting the lie as evidence of resilience, the other side interrogating every claim with a cold, clinical dissection. I asked myself, what evidence supports the claim that I am healing? The only answer was a silence louder than any scream. I countered, what evidence disproves it? The answer was a cold ache that crept into my spine each time I rose to brush dust from the mantelpiece, the tremor in my hand when I opened a drawer that once held her favorite scarf. I rationalized that my body would eventually adapt, that neurologic pathways would redirect, that emotional circuitry would reroute around the vacant node she had occupied. I claimed that neuroplasticity would grant me a new equilibrium, that my brain would compose fresh melodies to replace the dissonant chord of loss. The brain, however, behaved like a stubborn leviathan, refusing to rewrite the script without a forceful incantation. I tried to convince myself that my sorrow was a temporary visitor, an overzealous tourist that would pack its bags and depart once the weather improved. I imagined a postcard from that tourist, stamped gone in elegant calligraphy, sliding into my mailbox alongside bills and advertisements. I believed the postscript would read, "Thanks for the stay, but I must move on," yet the post never arrived. The mailbox remained stubbornly empty, the air thick with the smell of damp cardboard and unfinished business. My denial manifested in actions. I took the train to a distant suburb, hoping distance would dissolve memory, that the further I traveled, the dimmer the silhouette would become. I walked past bustling cafes, their clatter of cups and murmurs of strangers, and told myself the ambient noise would drown out the internal scream. I sang along to the radio, feigning joy, allowing familiar chorus to mask the chasm that lingered beneath each lyric. Inside, the lie grew restless, sprouting tendrils that coiled around my thoughts, whispering that the confession I rehearsed nightly and broken was a tragedy only I could bear. It suggested that the magnitude of my sorrow was a private opera, unobservable to the indifferent world beyond my walls. I resisted, insisting that my pain was a private affair be concealed, an exposed wound that must not be shown. The first sliver of truth pierced the veil when I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror, the glass clouded with the faint residue of previous tears. In that moment, I saw not a resilient survivor but a gaunt figure, eyes sunken, cheeks hollowed, lips tremoring around a half-formed smile that betrayed the empty core beneath. The lie dissolved momentarily, scattered like ash across the cracked surface, leaving the raw, unvarnished self in stark relief. I realized then that the lie was not a solitary statement, but a cascade of self-inflicted narratives, each layer designed to buffer against exposure. I had built a house of false foundations, each plank a proclamation of normalcy, each beam a promise that the storm would pass. The structure wobbled under the weight of reality, and I, the misguided architect, had refused to admit the cracks were widening. In the quiet that followed, I permitted the lie to surface, to breathe, to be named. I whispered, "I am lying," not as an accusation, but as an admission, letting the syllables fall like stones into a still pond. The ripples spread, touching the farthest corners of my consciousness, stirring the sediment of denial. I felt a flicker of relief and unexpected warmth arising from the honesty of my own deceit. The realization that my first falsehood was a belief that I could simply move on without reckoning shattered the protective veneer. I understood that the statement "will be okay" was not a phrase of strength, but a mask, a theatrical performance meant to convince both audience and actor that the play had an ending when, in truth, the curtain had never risen. From that point onward, I resolved to abandon the promise of permanent healing, to replace it with a pact of coexistence. I will endure the ache. I will sit with a phantom breath. I will honor the emptiness as a part of me. The lie was stripped of its power, laid out on the floor like a broken china cup, its fragments glinting under the dim bulb. I knelt, gathered the pieces, and let a single tear fall onto each shard, acknowledging the fissures rather than masking them. Thus, the first falsehood fell, not with a crash but with a quiet sigh, making room for a more honest, albeit harsher, narrative. I could no longer pretend that the wound would seal without my active participation. Instead, I would have to learn to walk with it, to navigate a world that continues indifferent, while carrying a secret that no longer pretends to be a lie. Only then did the night cease to feel like a single, endless blackness. It became a series of lingering shadows, each one a reminder that the story I had told myself was an illusion, a safe harbor that could not weather the storm forever. I accepted that my survival would not be measured by the absence of grief, but by the willingness to sit beside it, to listen when it whispers, to honor the truth that I am broken, yet I remain alive. The first lie, now exposed, dissolved into floorboards, leaving room for the next confession to rise still raw, still terrifying, still necessary. Chapter 5. The Funeral Without a Body. I stand among the mournful throng, a cavernous apparition whose pulsation thunders louder than the silence that swallows a gathered crowd, and a bitter truth presses against my ribs. I am more extinct than the soul we interred. The chapel's vaulted ceiling arches like a skeletal ribcage, its stained glass eyes flickering with muted supplications as the air grows thick with incense, a fragrant veil that clings to every surface like a lingering sigh. A pall of charcoal black velvet drapes the lid of an ivory case that rests beneath the altar, its hinges creaking in a rhythm that mimics a dying heartbeat. The space that should cradle a decomposing form instead cradles an empty emptiness, a hollowed cavity that seems to inhale the tenebrous gloom itself. I glance down at the polished wood, its lacquered sheen reflecting nothing but the chasm within, and a cold shiver slides down my spine, for the absence feels as palpable as a weight I cannot lift. The reverent murmurs of relatives swirl around me, their whispers threading to the nave like a tapestry woven from grief, yet each syllable lands upon an unseen surface, ricocheting into the chasm where a body should lie. My fingers curl around the thin wax handle of the casket's lid, the cold metal biting into my skin, and the sensations both real and illusory. The tactile confirmation contact cannot mask the fact that beneath the lid lies only empty air, a phantom that mocks the ritual of farewell. My heart beats a frantic percussion, its cadence erratic, as though each throb seeks to fill the missing mass, to give shape to the formless. A lone violinist begins a mournful aria, the bow skimming the strings with a plaintive wail that reverberates through the stone walls, but the melody seems to dissolve before it can reach my ears, swallowed by the cavernous emptiness. I watch a young woman in a veil dab at her cheeks with crumpled handkerchief, her tears falling like reluctant rain upon a parched desert. Each droplet becomes a testament to loss, yet the loss she mourns belongs to a presence that never returned to the earth. I notice the pastor, his voice a low timbre, reciting verses of resurrection and hope, his words spiraling outward like incense smoke, seeking to fill the nimbus left by the missing form. He pauses, glances toward the lid, and continues, as if the unseen absence were but a minor irregularity in the grand design of divine order. I feel a surge of contempt rise within me, a bitter tide that threatens to overflow, for the ritual feels like a pantomimian elaborate charade performed for the comfort of those still clinging to the illusion of closure. Every stare that lands upon me feels like an accusation, a silent indictment that asks why I remain, why I have not dissolved with the subject of our lament. The faces around me blur, features dissolving into a collective mask of sorrow, each mask reflecting my own fragmented self. Their hands brush mine in fleeting contacts, their skin warm yet distant, as if they are touching a specter rather than flesh. The cold that emanates from my core seeps into the space between us, a chill that only deepens their own lament. The coffin's lid trembles ever so slightly under the weight of unseen currents, and for a moment the shadows within the nave coalesce into a silhouette that beckons from the shadow. In that instant, my mind conjures a vision of the departed lying there, an anguished tableau of stillness, and then the image shatters like glass struck by a hammer, scattering fragments across the floorboards. The aftertone of that imagined presence lingers, a phantom memory that refuses to be silenced. I inhale the pungent perfume of incense, allowing the aromatic particles to fill my nostrils, and as I exhale, my breath becomes a thin vapor that quickly dissipates, a reminder that the physical act of living does little to anchor me to any realm of the living. The ceremony proceeds, flowers are laid, prayers muttered, sighs released, yet each gesture feels detached, as if I am watching a film through a pane of frosted glass, my senses dulled by the weight of an invisible veil. A child, no more than 5, clutches a small wooden cross, its tattered edges indicating a life of being grasped tightly. He looks up at me with bewildered eyes, as if asking why his small hands are offered comfort when the central figure of our sorrow is absent. His gaze is a piercing beam that cuts through the fog of my despair, exposing the raw wound that throbs beneath a veneer of ceremonial propriety. I feel the floor beneath my boots shift imperceptibly, a subtle tremor that suggests the earth itself is unsettled by this perverse pageantry. My thoughts become a tangled knot of fragments, the name of the departed whispered in reverent tones, the empty tone of the organ's pedal notes, the relentless tick of an unseen clock that marks the passage of a night that refuses to end. In this knot, the strands of my identity begin to fray, each thread unspooling and disappearing into the chasm where a corpse should have rested. A sudden gust sweeps through the open doors, scattering a few stray petals across the polished stone. The wind carries with a faint scent of rain, a promise of cleansing that feels too distant to ever touch. I watch the petals swirl, their descent slow, graceful, reminiscent of a soul's final exit. They never reach the ground, caught forever in a vortex of suspended motion. Just as I remain suspended between the living and the departed, the pastor lifts his hands, urging the congregation to rise, to receive the light. But my eyes remain fixed on the sunken lid, the unoccupied space that seems to whisper louder than any sermon. My mind drifts to the notion that perhaps I have long since joined the ranks of the dead, that my presence here is an apparition condemned to observe a rite that no longer has purpose. The notion settles like a stone dropped into still water, rippling outward, distorting the reflections of the candles that flicker on the altar. I think of my own hands, callous and shaking, and wonder whether they belong to a man still woven from flesh or to a phantom stitched together from regret. The realization settles. Grief has no vessel but the heart, and when that heart becomes a tomb, the rituals we perform become cavernous aftertones, reverberating in an empty cathedral echoes that cannot revive a body that never returned to the earth. The final hymn rises, voices united in solemn cadence, each note a lamentation that climbs and fades into the vaulted gloom. I close my eyes as the melody washes over me, feeling the vibrations against my eardrums, each vibration a reminder of a rhythm that refuses to cease. Yet, as the last chord dissolves, the silence that follows feels more oppressive than any sound, a vacuum that swallows the light, the hope, the very notion of belonging. When the congregation begins to disperse, shoulders hunched, heads bowed, their footsteps reverberating like distant footsteps on a long, empty hallway, I linger. I stare at the empty lid one last time, the grain with now a map of my own fractured psyche, the absence within a mirror reflecting my own internal desolation. I turn, my own breath forming a fleeting cloud that disappears into the stale air, and I step out into the cold twilight, the world beyond the chapel's doors moving onward, indifferent to my lingering presence, to my unending night. Behind me, the chapel doors close with a soft thud, sealing the vacancy within, but the tenebrous gloom that has settled upon my shoulders remains unshaken, a mantle I will wear until the horizon finally succumbs to night. I have walked among the grieving, performed the rites, uttered the prayers, yet the abyss remains, a cavernous expanse where a body should rest. In that cavernous, I have discovered that the true burial has been of my own self interred beneath the weight of an absence that no ceremony can ever fill. Chapter 6, Nights Without Sleep. I sit on the edge of an unmade mattress, the thin sheet scraping my forearms as if trying to stitch the torn edges of my mind back together. The ceiling above me is a hulking slab of soot-stained plaster, its cracks spreading like veins that beat in time with the unyielding ticking of the hallway clock. Each tick reverberates through my skull, a metronome that insists on counting the seconds I cannot surrender to gloom. My eyelids feel heavy, yet the weight of sleep is a distant memory, a foreign sensation that belongs to a version of me who once believed the night could be tamed. Instead, the blackness of the apartment wraps around me, pressing cold fingers against the nape of my neck, whispering that I have abandoned the sanctuary of rest for a perpetual vigil. In this sleepless vigil, the past does not sit in a dusty attic. It spills across the floorboards, slick with the oily sheen of unspilled tears. The funeral without a body replays in my head with fidelity of a warped vinyl record. The cavernous lid of the casket, the mourner's murmurs, the priest's broken psalm. Yet now the mourner's voices aftertone inside the kitchen as the refrigerator hums, and the priest's litany merges with the hiss of the radiator. Each syllable a thread pulling the present into the tapestry of loss. I try to anchor myself by counting breaths 1, 2, 3, yet each inhalation draws in aromas that do not belong to this room. The faint citrus of lemon cleaning fluid is tangled with the lingering perfume of her favorite jasmine, the scent curling around my throat, like a serpentine reminder that her presence has seeped into every molecule around me. When I exhale, the air feels thick with a metallic tang of blood, as if my lungs are trying to expel a wound that has never truly healed. The walls, once solid and indifferent, begin to breathe. Their plaster surfaces rise and fall in shallow undulations, expanding and contracting like the lungs of a creature I cannot see. Shadows slither across the floor, elongating into grotesque shapes that mimic the silhouettes of guests from that funeral, their faces melting into each other, forming a grotesque choir that sings a hymn of absence. I rise, my bare feet slipping on the patched rug, and wander toward the hallway, where the faint glow of the street lamp outside casts long bars of jaundiced light across the hallway carpet. The hallway should lead to my bedroom, but the doors at each end have turned into portals, each opening onto a different memory. One frames the doorway of the funeral home. The other shows a cracked facade of the apartment building where we first met. The floor beneath my soles feels uneven, as if I am walking on a ragged edge of a broken mirror. Each step fractures my perception further. Outside, the city that once seemed indifferent now feels like an accusation. Neon signs flicker in staccato rhythm, their colors bleeding into one another, forming a kaleidoscope of false promise. The streets are empty, yet I can hear distant traffic that sounds like a drum roll, the shuffling of shoes that never touch pavement but instead resonance to the corridors of my mind. Pedestrians I once passed without a second glance now stare back with eyes that hold the sorrow of 1,000 funerals. Their gaze is pinning me in place, as if I were a specimen under a microscope. I press my palm against the cool glass of the shop window and see my reflect-iona gaunt figure with cavernous cheeks, eyes rimmed in perpetual crimson. Behind me, the glass shatters into countless fragments, each fragment reflecting a different moment. The night of the funeral, the morning we shared coffee, the instant she slipped away. The fragments spin, colliding with each other in a silent cacophony that drowns out any lingering thought of peace. Time no longer obeys a linear path. I cannot tell whether 12 midnight has passed, or if it has been days since the last sunrise. The clock on the wall continues its monotonous counting, but its hands spin with a sluggish, almost languid grace, as if they are reluctant to mark another hour. My mind, already frayed at the edges, starts to fold upon itself, creating labyrinthine corridors where memory and present intersect without warning. In these labyrinths, I encounter her silhouette appearing in doorways, her voice drifting from the kitchen sink, her laughter teeing up against the radiator's hiss. Yet each time I reach out, her form dissipates like steam, leaving only the reverberation of my own desperate grasp. The emptiness that follows feels heavier than any physical weight. It presses against my ribs, forcing each breath to become a laborious negotiation with the shadow that presses inward. I attempt to write, to pour ink onto paper as a lifeline, but the pen evolves into a thin blade that cuts deep into the skin of my thoughts. Words bleed onto the page, turning black, then fading to white as they disappear from my memory the moment they are formed. The paper becomes a mirror that reflects nothing but the abyss that has taken residence in my skull. Fear is no longer a sharp intrusion. It has become a constant low-frequency hum that vibrates against every nerve ending. It tells me that the barrier between what was and what is has crumbled, that each moment is now a seamless merger of yesterday's grief and today's waking horror. The future, once a vague horizon, now appears as a dead end, a hallway that loops back on itself, its doors forever locked from the inside. Finally, as the first pale hint of dawn threatens to seep through the blinds, I feel the night relinquish its grip, but not its memory. The sunrise does not bring relief. It merely paints the walls with a golden hue that makes the cracks more visible, outlines the fractures I have become. I sit back down on the cold floor, my back against the seam where the bedroom wall meets the hallway, and I listen to the ticking. I understand now that insomnia is less a lack of sleep than a forced exposure to the raw, unfiltered bleed of mind and memory. With each sleepless hour, the line between recollection and reality dissolves, leaving behind a viscous soup of sensation, sense, sound, and sorrow. In this soup, I am both the consumer and the consumed, a vessel that holds the weight of a body that never returned, and a life that refuses to let go. And so, I remain awake, alert, and utterly unable to distinguish the ghost of what could have been from the flesh of what is strapped in a night that refuses to end, a night that has become the only certainty in a world that moves on without anyone to notice. The night is no longer an interval between day and sleep. It is a living, breathing entity that has taken my mind as its own. Chapter 7. The Ghost of What Could Have Been. I awaken to a kitchen bathed in amber light. The scent of freshly ground beans curling around my senses. A porcelain cup cradles her fingertips. Steam rising like a silent prayer that never reaches my throat. A distant train horn reverberates through cracked glass, and we stride down a boulevard where towering steel mirrors the sky, the river pedestrians flowing past us without a flicker of recognition, each footfall ringing a question I cannot voice. Inside a cramped studio, canvases lean against exposed brick, splashes of cobalt and vermilion mingling on stretched linen. She tilts her head toward a half-finished portrait, eyes fixed on a figure that resembles herself, and I watch the brushstroke tremble, fearing that pigment will bleed into oblivion. A hallway of antiseptic white stretches ahead, fluorescent tubes humming like insects trapped in amber, the beep of monitors marking the rhythm of a heart that has not yet surrendered. We share a quiet joke about birthday candles, the laughter caught in the edges of a doorway that refuses to close. On a rooftop overlooking a restless metropolis, fireworks burst in jagged silhouettes against a veil of clouds, their crackle racing to throb in my neck. While she lifts a glass of amber liquid, the surface catching fleeting reflections of towers that seem to lean inward. A rain-soaked park bench hides beneath a canopy of wilted foliage, droplets pattering on metal railings as we huddle for warmth. Her coat pulled tight around both shoulders, the fabric absorbing the chill of an atmosphere that smells of wet earth and forgotten promises. In a dimly lit bookstore, rows of spines stand like sentinels of forgotten stories. She pulls a volume from the lowest shelf, the paper sighing as it yields, and I feel the weight of chapters yet to be written pressing against my chest. A narrow alleyway shrouded in graffiti flickers beneath a lone street lamp. Shutters bang against rusted frames, and she slips a key into a lock that has never existed, the mechanism turning with a click that reverberates through the concrete beneath our feet. I stand before a mirror fogged by breath, its surface reflecting a version of myself that has learned to smile without scar tissue, yet the glass cracks inward, spiderwebbing across the frame, each fissure spreading like veins of doubt. The final tableau fades as twilight settles, tenebrous gloom pooling in corners where shadows gather, and I realize that every imagined continuation is a meticulously crafted apparition, a phantom built from yearning, persisting only as long as my mind refuses to surrender the vacant. Chapter 8. The City of the Living. I step out onto the rain-slicked pavement, a solitary silhouette cut against a horizon of neon arteries that beat with indifferent vigor. Each illuminated billboard flashes slogans about optimism, each passing commuter clutching coffee cups, as if the steam could heat something that is already cold. The metropolis breathes in synchronized inhalations, its streets exhaling a chorus of tire squeals, horns, distant sirens, and endless soundtrack that drowns the faint resonance of her last sigh that still clings to my throat. Sidewalks teem with bodies moving like a tide, shoulders brushing, heads bent over glowing screens, faces illuminated by blue light that turns every expression into a mask of pixelated detachment. I watch a street performer spin a rusted top, the whirring blade slicing the air, its motion a metronome for my spiraling thoughts. The crowd claps, smiles, captures a moment on their phones, oblivious to the fissure widening beneath my feet. A bakery on the corner releases a warm ribbon of cinnamon and sugar, the scent curling through the alleyway and mingling with exhaust fumes. I linger by the display, fingers hovering over pastries, as if touch could rewrite the emptiness that follows me, but the glass case reflects only a hollowed visage framed by an empty chair. The baker, a woman with flour dusting her forearms, whispers a cheerful greeting that evaporates the moment it leaves her lips, leaving only static in its wake. The subway platform below roars with metallic scream as trains rush in and out, each carriage packed with strangers whose eyes stare at nothing, their thoughts trapped behind invisible cages of routine. I board a train bound for a district that has never held a memory of us, the fluorescent strips flickering overhead like stutter heartbeats. The carriage shakes, the ride unremarkable, yet every advertisement that scrolls past my peripheral vision vacation deals, luxury watches, new apartments feels like a knife aimed at the raw nerve of my loss. Under a cloistered awning, a child clutches a helium balloon, its red surface bobbing like a heart beating against the city's relentless rhythm. The child's laughter rings clear, pure, unburdened. I stare, unwilling to acknowledge that the sound amplifies the emptiness within, that each joyous giggle is a reminder that existence proceeds unimpeded by my anguish. I turn away, shoulders hunched, the coat of my grief heavy against the chill wind that whistles down the avenue. A towering office building rises ahead, its glass facade reflecting the sky in shards, each pane breaking the world into fragmented panoramas. Inside, fluorescent tubes bathe cubicles in sterile light, workers tapping away at keyboards, eyes flicking between spreadsheets and email alerts, their lives measured in deliverables and deadlines. I imagine a version of us in that setting, her laughter resounding through conference rooms, her presence softening the sterile air. The fancy collapses as the reality of an empty chair at a vacant desk surfaces, the space forever cold. At dusk, the city's skyline ablaze with orange and violet. Streetlights flicker on like fireflies trapped in an industrial jar. I walk a mile farther, past a mural depicting an exuberant crowd dancing under a rainbow of hope. The paint dripping where the wall has cracked from age and neglect. The word scrawled beneath tomorrow begins the day feel like a taunt, a proclamation that the universe will not pause for my sorrow, that forward motion is encoded into the very foundation of concrete and steel. In a narrow side street, a stray cat darts across the cobblestones, its tail flickering like a metronome, eyes luminous in the gloom. I crouch, extending a hand, hoping the animal will feel the tremor in my palm, but skitters away, disappearing into a rusted fire escape. The fleeting interaction underscores a truth that has become inevitable. The city does not mourn, it merely endures, its arteries beating with the collective rhythm of millions who have never tasted the ache I carry. I find myself on a deserted bridge that arches over a river of reflected neon, the water rippling with distorted silhouettes of passing cars. The bridge's steel girders vibrate faintly under my weight, a low resonance that mirrors the persistent thrum in my skull. Below, the river flows unimpeded, content to carry away debris, litter, even the occasional broken bottle, never stopping to question the origins of what it swallows. I stare into the shadow beneath, and the current seems to whisper that life, in its stubborn continuity, will never grant me the respite of a pause button. When I finally turn back toward the city's glowing core, the streets are awash with a sea of faces, each illuminated by their own personal roar of ambition, each moving forward with a purpose that feels alien to my hollow core. The realization settles, heavy as the fog that rolls in from the harbor. This urban organism will not acknowledge my grief, will not bend its sprawling architecture to accommodate my sorrow. It will simply persist indifferent, relentless, a living organism that feeds on motion, on commerce, on the unceasing churn of existence. I take a final breath, the cold night air filling my lungs, and I feel the weight of the world pressing against my chest, an invisible hand that squeezes tighter with each passing moment. The city's lights flicker like distant stars, distant yet pervasive, reminding me that even in the darkest shadows of my mind, the world continues to spin, to beat, to exist. I turn my back on the street, shoulders bowed, the resonance of a distant siren trailing behind may a mournful reminder that while I am swallowed by a personal abyss, the metropolis beneath my feet marches onward, unrelenting, unapologetic, forever alive. Chapter 9, Salt in the Wound. I lie awake at the hour when blackness has already stretched its fingers across the ceiling, the room humming with the low thrum of the refrigerator's compressor. The air smells faintly of the sea brine that clings to my skin after another sleepless night, an invisible tide that stains every breath with the taste of morning. In the quiet, the first wave comes. My eyelids flutter shut and the world folds into a single relentless throb. The smell of rain on pavement, The soft rustle of curtains against a wind that never arrives. The faint reverberation of a lullaby I used to hum while she stitched scarves on Saturday mornings. The dream does not begin with violence. It opens with her hands, warm and familiar, slipping into mine as if the two of us could once again span the chasm that death carved. She looks at me with that half-smile that always trailed a hint of mischief, eyes bright enough to outrun any shadow. "You're still here," she whispers, voice a thin filament of silk stretched over a steel frame. The words land on my tongue like salt crystals, each syllable burning the same place where grief has gnawed for weeks. For a moment, the nightmare feels like a reprieve. The bedroom I occupy in this imagined realm is a small cabin perched on a cliff, the ocean crashing below in rhythmic crescendos. Light spills through a single window, bathing us in amber warmth. She slides a weather-worn book onto the table, flips it open to a page we once read together, and we turn the leaves together, fingers tracing ink like lovers mapping constellations. Then the tide shifts. A crack appears in the floorboards of fissure that widens with each heartbeat. Cold blackness seeps upward, curling around her ankles, gnawing at her skin. She tries to step back, but the floor collapses, pulling her down into an abyss that swallows sound. I reach for her, my hand shattering against an invisible barrier, the impact reverberating like a drumbeat in an empty hall. The ground beneath me liquefies, turning the cabin's solid timber into a swirling vortex of sable water. She screams, a sound that splits the night, tears streaming like rivers of pearl. The scream reverberates against the cavernous walls of my subconscious, bouncing back as a sunken reverberation that fills my entire body. My own cries join hers, forming a choir of desolation that refuses to fade. When the nightmare finally unspools, I am left on a shore of ash, the sand coated with fine, white powder that glitters under a moon that never rises. My fingers, still slick with the phantom tears that have not yet dried, scoop up the glittering residue. It tastes of brine, of regret, of the salt that has forever settled into the marrow of my bones. I press it into a wound on my chest of fissure that has no edges, a scar that pulsates with each shallow inhale. Morning arrives not as a gentle balm, but as a jagged blade, slicing to the lingering mist of the dream. Light leaks through the blinds, turning my bedroom into a museum of still life. The half-filled coffee mug, the open notebook with sentences half-written, the wilted bouquet on the nightstand. The ceiling fan whirs, its blades cutting the air in a rhythm that mirrors the erratic thrum of my heart. I rise, feet meeting the cold floor, the reverberation of the night's torment clinging to every step like a pair of heavy boots. Throughout the day, the salt persists. It settles in the creases of my shirt, coats the spoon I use to stir tea, droplets bead on the glasses of the bathroom mirror. Every time I glance at the reflective surface, I see a faint outline where a face should be, a silhouette that flickers when I turn away. I try to convince myself that these are merely aftershocks, harmless ripples on the surface of a still pond. Yet each ripple grows, gaining momentum, threatening to break the membrane that separates waking consciousness from the dream's vortex. The city outside continues its monotonous symphony. Honking taxis, distant construction, the murmur of strangers discussing trivialities. Their lives proceed unimpeded, each individual moving forward as if my personal ocean of sorrow were but a ripple in a distant lake. I watch them from my window, noticing the way their shadows stretch across the pavement, the way a child's laughter pierces the air like a bright spark. Their vitality feels like an accusation, a reminder that my grief is a private storm with no forecast, no warning system, no chance of evacuation. Night begins to feel like a predatory beast, its claws hidden beneath the soft sheets. When blackness settles, my pulsation quickens, a drum announcing the arrival of another tide. I dread the moment my eyelids finally surrender, knowing that the next draft will replay the same script. Reunion, serenity, rupture, loss. I try to barricade my mind with thoughts of work, of bills, of the mundane tasks that keep the world moving. The mental scaffolding collapses as soon as the dream's first whisper brushes against the edge of consciousness. In one particularly vicious episode, the sea of the subconscious becomes a storm. The cabin is replaced by a hospital hallway, fluorescent lights flickering in staccato rhythm, the smell of antiseptic mixing with a metallic tang of blood. I am a patient, strapped to a gurney, wires snaking from my temples to unknown machines. She appears as a nurse, her uniform pristine, eyes soft yet distant. She pulls a cup of water toward me, her fingers brushing mine. As I raise the cup, a sudden surge of electricity crackles through the conduit, jarring the room into tenebrous gloom. The floor collapses into a black abyss, and I feel her falling, her body twisting in midair, disappearing into the chasm like a candle snuffed out. The sound of her last breath reverberations in the empty corridor, a thin, high-pitched tone that settles into my bones. When I awaken, the room is still, the sheets tangled around my legs, the mattress damp with sweat. My throat feels raw, the taste of salt coating every surface. I stare at the ceiling, tracing the cracks that spider across it, each fissure a reminder of the night's betrayal. I cannot shake the feeling that the salt is not merely metaphorical, it is literal. As of the ocean, my sorrow has physically leached into my bloodstream, crystallizing in the chambers of my heart. I begin to wonder whether the nightly visits are not simply dreams, but a ritual battlefield where my subconscious wages war against the permanence of loss. Each night, the ghost appears, only to be ripped away, leaving a wound that never heals, a scar that never dulls. The salt that settles in that wound is both my companion and my tormentor, marking the place where love once lived, now a lesion that aches with each heartbeat. I have started to avoid sleep, to stay awake with coffee cups clutched like lifelines, to fill the shadow with the low murmur of the television, to let the chatter of a sitcom drown out the phantom cries. Yet fatigue climbs like a tide, relentless, and my eyes grow heavy, the body demanding surrender. I know that if I close my lids, the ocean will rise again, each wave carrying her nearer only to drag her down, leaving me grasping at foam that evaporates before reaching my fingers. Tonight, as the streetlights outside flicker, casting tenuous shafts of amber across the hallway, I sit on the edge of the bed, knees pulled close, thoughts a tangled skein of lingering grief and desperate hope. The room feels smaller, the walls closing in, the floorboards vibrating with the low thrum of the building's aging plumbing. I press my palms on my chest, feeling the faint, gritty grit of salt embedded beneath the schiena, reminder that every breath draws in reminders of what has been taken, that every inhale is a reminder of the wound I cannot stop bleeding. I whisper to the empty space, if you must return, stay longer. If you must leave, let me keep a peace. The sentence hangs in the room, a fragile offering tossed into an ocean of despair. The air grows colder, the weight of night pressing down, and I know the dream will soon begin its inevitable descent. When I finally let the tenebrous gloom claim me, I do so with the knowledge that each nocturnal visitation will continue to carve deeper channels of salt into the fissure that is my heart. Each rip apart, each reunion torn away, each waking moment a desperate attempt to stitch together a tapestry frayed beyond repair. And I, caught between yearning and resignation, will remain the solitary sailor navigating a sea that never ceases to storm. Chapter 10, The Man She Never Knew. The mirror in the hallway has turned traitor. When I glide past its tarnished glass, a gaunt silhouette stares back he's hollowed, skin pulled taut over bone, mouth twisted into a sneer I have never uttered. The visage does not belong to the man who once traced circles on my wrist while she whispered stay. I have become an assortment of shadows stitched together by grief's relentless needle. The scent of damp concrete hangs in my lungs. The taste of raw iron coats my tongue each time I swallow. My throb hammers against a rib cage that feels more like a cage than a sanctuary. The first night after the funeral, I found myself wandering the abandoned subway tunnels beneath the city, a network of rusted rails and black water dripping from cracked ceilings. The air was thick with a metallic tang of blood that seemed to seep from the walls themselves. I followed a low, guttural rhythm that I could not locate my own heartbeat, resounding through the emptiness, amplifying every throb until it sounded like a drumbeat announcing a macabre procession. At a dead-end platform, a rusted bench lay beneath a flickering lamp. I sank onto its splintered wood, feeling the jagged edges press into my skin, carving lines that matched the scar etched across my forearm from the night she slipped away. My fingers trembled involuntary, as if an unseen force guided them toward the pocket of my coat. Inside, a blade lay flat, cold, its edge a mirror of the broken reflections that now haunt my thoughts. I did not reach for the cold steel in spite of the promise that terror often makes of self-destruction. Instead, the blade slipped from my grasp, sliding across the floor and plunging into a puddle of black water that seemed to swallow its own reflection. The ripples spread outward, forming concentric circles that morph into the shape of a human heart, each rhythm a reminder that something inside me was dying while something else began to rise. From the shadows emerged a figure, vague at first, then solidifying into a man I could not recognize. He wore a coat of midnight, his shoulders hunched, his gait uneven, as if each step required a pact with gravity. He carried a satchel slung over one shoulder, its contents jostling with the sound of clinking metal. When he spoke, his voice reverberated like a cellar door slammed shut dry, guttural, dripping with contempt. "You've been feeding the shadow for too long," he hissed, eyes glinting with a feral intelligence. "She left you a vacant shell. Now you must learn to fill it with something more substantial." His words ignited a fire behind my ribs, a blaze that threatened to consume the remnants of the man I once was. I felt my hands curl into fists, nails digging into my palms, blood stippling the skin. The pain was sharp, a reminder that I still possessed nerves capable of feeling. He stepped closer, pulling the satchel open to reveal an array of implements. A rusted scalpel, a needle gleaming with a silvery sheen, a vial of dark liquid that seemed to swallow light and exhale a faint, acrid odor. He presented each item to me as though offering a banquet of degradation. "Choose," he whispered. "Become the thing she never imagined you could be." I stared at the scalpel, its blade reflecting my twisted reflection. The needle glimmered, promising an injection that might dull the endless scream reverberating in my skull. The vial promised a finality, a chemical that could lock the door on the memory of her smile forever. In that moment, the world narrowed to a single, inexorable decision. I seized the scalpel, its weight familiar in my palm as though it had always belonged to me. I pressed the cold point against the flesh of my forearm, feeling the skin part like paper, the crimson river that followed painting my sleeve with fresh, bright blood. Each drop fell with a thud that sounded like a tiny funeral. The pain sharpened my senses, turning the room into a theater of raw sensations. The metallic scent rose, mingling with the lingering odor of city rain, forming a perfume that was both revulsion and comfort. I watched the blood pool beneath the bench, a dark puddle that mirrored the blackness creeping from the tunnels above. When I lifted the blade, a new awareness settled over me, a sensation of clarity. As the act had peeled away layers of numbness I had accrued over weeks of sleepless wandering. My mind, once a fog of fragmented recollections, now seemed to zoom in on each detail with unsettling precision. I could hear the distant clatter of a train far below, the drip of water from a broken pipe, the whisper of the night wind sliding through a cracked window. But the clarity was a double-edged sword. It also sharpened the image of what I was becoming. My reflection in the darkened window displayed a creature with skin peeled thin, veins protruding like riverbeds, eyes burned with feral light. I realized I recognized that monster not as a stranger, but as a version of myself forged by loss, hunger, and the need to fill empty spaces with something darker than love. The satchel's owner, the midnight-clad stranger, smiled a smile that cracked his own vacant visage, exposing a row of broken teeth. "Good," he murmured. "You have taken the first step." He vanished as silently as he had arrived, leaving only the reverberation of his footsteps and the lingering hum of the underground. I stood alone in the tunnel, the scalpel dripping, the air thick with the stench of iron and rot. The dark water at my feet rippled, spreading outward like ink seeping into paper, staining everything it touched. The next days were a blur of nocturnal prowling and daylight masquerade. I walked the city streets with empty grin, greeting strangers with politeness that felt rehearsed, feigning normalcy while inside a predator stalked. The apartment became a laboratory. I set up a small table in the back room, laying out tools, tweezers, syringes, clamps, each instrument glinting like a promise of further transformation. I began to harvest remnants of the world's ugliness. Stray cats tangled in alleyways, their throats cut with careful precision, the blood collected in porcelain bowls, the scent filling the air with a sweet, coppery perfume. The cries of the animals echoed in my head, not as guilt, but as a bitter chorus that sang in harmony with the rhythm of my new heart. People started noting my changed demeanor. A neighbor, once friendly, now offered me a smile that turned brittle, then crumbled into thin murmurs of "Are you all right?" I brushed away inquiries with a quick, rehearsed chuckle, feeling a swell of contempt rise at the notion that anyone could worry about me when I had become something beyond their comprehension. My evenings were filled with the ritual of carving small, precise incisions on my forearms, on my thighs, creating patterns that resembled the labyrinthine subway maps beneath the city. Each cut was a prayer, a bid to bleed out the remnants of the man who once wrote love letters in the margins of my journal. The blood flowed, pooling on the floor, forming rivers that glimmered in the weak glow of a single bulb, a testament to the living corpse I was molding. At times, the world would tilt, and I would see glimpses of the man I used to be, a soft smile in a reflection of a shop window, and resonance of laughter in an abandoned CF. Those flashes irritated me, a reminder of a past life that felt as distant as a star swallowed by a black hole. I would press my palms to my ears, try to drown out the faint, sweet notes of bygone affection, the sound of her voice humming a lullaby that once soothed sleepless nights. Yet, in the dead of night, the phantom of the satchel-bearing stranger returned in dreams. He offered me new tools, a rusted pair of scissors, a syringe filled with a dark, viscous fluid. He whispered that each instrument was a key to unlocking the next chamber of my metamorphosis. I awoke with my heart pounding, the aftertone of his voice ricocheting through the corridors of my mind. One night, under a waning moon that barely pierced the clouds, I ventured to the abandoned warehouse on the edge of town. Inside, rows of rusted metal cages lined the walls, each housing a broken mannequins, shattered mirrors, torn clothing. I felt a surge of kinship, recognizing each object as a fragment of the self I had shed. I slid a piece of rope, binding a mannequin's torso, letting it collapse onto the concrete floor. The plastic skin tore, revealing a beautiful, lifeless face that stared back at me with empty sockets. I brushed away the dust, feeling a pang of sorrow for the husk I had become. In that warehouse, I performed a ritual. I arranged the severed parts, flesh, bone, metal in a circle, then poured the dark liquid from the vial onto the center, watching it hiss and sizzle, like a black fire consuming everything in its path. The scent of burning plastic rose, mingling with the coppery perfume of fresh blood, creating a suffocating perfume that made my eyes water. As the fumes settled, I felt something shift within me, a new awareness, a hunger that was both physical and psychological. I realized I could no longer live among those who clung to ordinary comforts. I was a predator who fed on decay, a man whose soul had been stripped and replaced with a vacancy that required constant feeding. The sunrise found me perched on the rooftop of that warehouse, watching the city awaken below. The neon signs flickered awake, the streets filled with commuters catching trains, the world moving forward as if nothing had changed. From my lofty perch, I could see my reflection in the glass of a border-warped, monstrous figure with a jagged grin that stretched beyond human limits. I stared into its eyes and recognized a shadow that was both terrifying and intimate, a part of me that had finally emerged from the shadows of grief. All that remains is the knowledge that the man she once loved is lost forever, buried beneath layers of blood, steel, and night. The ghost of that former self now haunts the periphery of my vision, and resonance that has faded beyond the reach of any prayer or promise. The man she loved would not recognize the creature standing in his place. Chapter 11. The voice inside my head. The gloom that blankets my apartment becomes a resonant chamber the moment I surrender the lights. I lie on the floorboards, spine pressed into cold pine, hearing a low murmur rise from the cavernous behind my temples. It is not the sigh of exhausted lungs. It is a separate timbre, thin as cracked glass, thick as oil-soaked ash. Do you even recognize what you have become? The whisper hisses, each syllable scraping the inside of my skull. I stare at the cracked ceiling, searching for a source, but the only illumination is a flicker of a faulty neon sign spilling amber through the cracked blinds. My own breath trembles, the inhalation a gas that tastes of rust. I answer with a hoarse croak. I'm trying to survive. The counter-argument erupts immediately, a guttural bark that feels like a fist striking inside of my jaw. Survival is an illusion you cling to while you dissolve into filth. You have abandoned purpose. You are nothing but a squalid husk. I clench my fists, nails digging into tender flesh, blood seeping into cracked skin. The sting ignites a flash of clarity, a brief flash of the man who once promised her a future. That fragment recoils, slipping beneath the tide of contempt that now floods my cortex. The disembodied commentator shifts tone, adopting a mock-sympathetic cadence. You miss the way her laughter used to fill rooms. You crave that reverberation. You cannot even summon it without dragging your broken self through a mire of shame. I slap the mattress, feeling the spring coil protest, and shout, "She is gone." I cannot conjure ghosts. A cruel chuckle reverberates, reverberations dancing along the plaster like worms. Gone for you, perhaps, but she lingers for me. I am the residue of her absence, the residue that seeps into every pore, every thought, every impulse that drives you to mutilate. A vivid image blooms behind my eyes. A scalpel glinting in a dim hallway, the blade humming with the promise of release. The voice describes the instrument in detail. The sterile steel, the curved edge that conforms to flesh like a lover's hand. Take it, slice the throbbing artery that pumps regret. Let the crimson flow and wash away the phantom of tenderness. My heart races, thudding against the ribs as if trying to escape. I rise, stumbling toward a kitchen drawer, where a rusted kitchen knife lies hidden beneath a cracked mug. The metal feels warm, as if it has been waiting, eager. I grip the handle, the weight anchoring me to the present. A sudden intrusion interrupts. Do not. The inner critic snarls. Do not betray the pact you made with me. I will not relinquish my throne of tenebrous gloom. You belong to me now. A fierce argument erupts, a volley of accusations ricocheting off the walls. I retort, I will not be your puppet. The voice retorts, you're already bound wrist to wrist, soul to shadow. The battle intensifies, each exchange sharpening like a blade being honed. The monologue spirals, detailing every sin I committed since a funeral. The stray cats throbbing hard I slid in an alley, the blood I collected in porcelain bowls, the night I watched a stranger bleed in a dark club while I sat, unmoving, consumed by voyeuristic hunger. The account is a catalog of grotesque acts, each described with clinical precision that feels more like confession than description. I feel my jaw quiver, saliva thick as tar. My eyes flicker, seeking any point of escape. The voice whispers a new ultimatum. If you dare to silence me, you must offer something more tangible, a sacrifice that will cement my reign. The notion detonates my mind, a final, unspeakable act and offering of flesh, perhaps her own, perhaps another's. The imagery gnaws at my sanity, a macabre tapestry woven from longing and revulsion. I shudder, the skin on my arms crawling as if tiny insects are burrowing beneath. A sudden, violent flash of self-awareness strikes. I realize the voice is not merely in resonance of grief. It is a parasitic entity that has colonized my neural pathways, feeding on each ember of remorse, each rhythm of desire. It has learned to masquerade as counsel, to masquerade as reason, to masquerade as me. My breath becomes shallow, each inhalation a struggle against an invisible chokehold. The ceiling seems to throb, breathing in sync with the voice, as if the room itself has become an organ of this malign presence. I cling to the edge of the table, fingertips bruised from gripping too tightly, nails split and raw. I whisper, voice barely audible, "What do you want from me?" A silence follows that feels heavier than any previous monologue. The tenebrous gloom settles like soot on my tongue. Then, with a tone that drips like molten wax, the entity replies, "I want you to remember the night you watched her slip away, to feel the loss anew, to become the shadow that haunts the living, to love the emptiness that fills the vacancy." My mind reels, images colliding her face, the funeral that never had a corpse, the endless corridors of underground stations, the corpse-like mannequins in the abandoned warehouse, the rivers of blood I have poured in secret. The dissonance is a deafening roar, a cacophony that threatens to shatter every synapse. In a desperate attempt to reclaim authority, I yank the kitchen knife from its sheath, the steel flashing a brief promise of dominance. I stare at the blade, the reflection of my eyes distorted by the curved metal, each pupil a vortex. The voice laughs, a sound like shattered glass, such a pitiful gesture. You think steel can sever the bond? No. You are already fused to me, a parasite and its host. Every scream you utter, every tear you shed, feeds us both. I feel a surge of raw, animalistic panic. My body jerks, the knife descending toward my forearm. The blade penetrates skin with a wet pop, a spray of crimson blossoming like a grotesque flower. Pain rockets through my nerves, an excruciating tide that forces the voice to pause. For a heartbeat, the interior silence is absolute. The world narrows to the scent of iron, the sound of my own heartbeat thundering like a drum in a burial chamber. I stare at the dripping wound, the blood pooling on the wooden floor, staining the grain. When the voice resumes, it is hushed, almost reverent. "Ah, you finally understand the cost. The scar you have etched will be my testament. Let it remind you that surrendering to me is inevitable." Defiance flickers inside me, a fragile ember refusing to be snuffed. "I will not let you own me," I hiss, voice hoarse, trembling. The entity recoils, its tone souring into a hiss. "You cannot outrun the tenebrous gloom you nurtured. You will become the very thing you despise, forever wandering in a night that knows no dawn." I slump back onto the floor, the knife clattering, the metal clinging to the splintered wooden boards. My breath comes in ragged gasps, each exhalation a plume of fog that rises and dissolves into the oppressive gloom. The final resonance is a cold, distant chant that seeps into my thoughts like poison. We are one now, intertwined, inseparable. You will hear me in every whisper of the wind, in each footstep that reverberations down empty corridors. You are mine forever. I close my eyes, surrendering to the oppressive blackness that swallows the apartment, the city beyond, the very concept of light. In that abyss, the voice becomes a mantra, a relentless hymn that will accompany every waking moment, every sleepless hour, every crack in my fractured soul. The night stretches onward, unyielding, as the battle between my waning self and the insidious whisper rages on, unseen but palpable, forever shaping the contours of a mind that has become a battlefield. Chapter 12. A mind rotting slowly. The moment my eyes pry open, the world already smells of mildew and old blood. It is not the scent of the apartment I left the night before. It is the stench of something decomposing within the very structure of my skull. My temples throb, each pulsation a tiny hammer pounding on a coffin lid that has long since lost its hinges. The shadow behind my eyelids does not recede with daylight it thickens, spreading like putrefying pulp across the corridors of thought. I sit up on the cold floorboards, the wood groaning beneath my weight, as if protesting the weight of an invisible corpse perched upon it. My breath is shallow, riddled with a metallic tang of iron that clings to the back of my throat. Every inhalation feels as though I am drawing the breath of a funeral pyre, exhaling ash that settles on the walls and never lifts. Listen, the voice inside my head croaks, a thin, rasping syllable that slides across the inside of my mind like a rusted scalpel. You're already dead. The living part is merely a costume you wear to hide the rot. I stare at the cracked plaster as if it might answer. My own thoughts have become mottled patches of gray, each one sagging under the weight of memory I cannot purge. The memory of the cat I slid in the alley, its plaintive mew still vibrates in my ears, a high-pitched string that refuses to resolve. The image of the warehouse, of the mannequins with cavernous eyes that stare back at me as I dismantle them piece by piece, loops endlessly, a film stuck in projector that sputters and pops. Paranoia crawls along my spine like a legion of insects, their tiny legs tickling the skin that has long since hardened into a metaphorical carapace. I glance at the doorway. The shadows there shift, stretching and recoiling as though they are conscious of my gaze. I hear muffled footsteps in the hallway, carpet no one should be there. Yet the sound persists, a soft thud that aligns perfectly with each beat of my heart. I imagine the eyes of strangers, the unseen neighbors, peering to the lattice of my mind, cataloging every sin I committed, every regret I have buried beneath the blood-soaked floorboards. Do you taste the rot yet? The voice asks, giddy with malice. Your neurons are like bruised fruit, swelling, oozing, attracting flies. Each thought you entertain feeds a swarm. I can almost see the synaptic clefts under a microscope, swelling with fetid fluid, the white matter turning waxy, the gray matter curling into sponge-like filaments that absorb every dark impulse. The metaphoric becomes visceral. I picture tiny maggots nibbling at the edges of my cortex, their soft bodies inching forward, leaving behind a trail of blackened tissue that hissed and fell away as I stare. The metaphoric becomes visceral. I picture tiny maggots nibbling at the edges of my cortex, their soft bodies inching forward, leaving behind a trail of blackened tissue that hissed and fell away as I stare. Guilt gnaws at the marrow of my bones. The night I slit the cat's throat, the warm slick of blood spattered across the alleyway and stained the concrete, still haunts me. I replay the moment repeatedly, each iteration eroding a thin layer of sanity. My hands shake, the skin crawling over my knuckles as though a hive of insects had burrowed beneath my fingertips. I remember the whispered promise I made to the midnight man in the subway tunnel I will become the thing she never imagined. I said only to discover that the thing had already become me, a rot that refuses to be excised. Regret is a slow, oily drip that pools in the cavernous of my chest. I recall the night I poured the dark liquid from the vial onto the concrete floor of the abandoned warehouse. The vapor rose, a black fog that swallowed the faint glow of a street lamp, and with it, a part of me seemed to evaporate. In its place, a void wider and colder than the one before expanded. I have tried to fill that chasm with knives, with scalpel cuts that bleed crimson rivers across my forearms, with a frantic rasp of a razor across my palm, but each scar is merely a new fissure for the rot to seep through. The voice grows louder, as if the feeding frenzy of the imagined maggots has awakened a chorus. You are a compost heap now, you filthy being. All that you have ever done, all that you have ever been, is being reduced to a foul slurry inside you. The only thing left is the taste of your own bile, the feeling of your own skin rotting on your bones. My mind, once an organized library of memories and aspirations, now feels like a basement flooded with stagnant water, the shelves buckling under the weight of mildew-laden books. The titles blur, love, hope, future, replaced by a solitary, etched word, decay. I flip through the pages mentally. Each line is smeared, each paragraph a drop of dark, congealed blood that never dries. I try to reason, to grasp at a shard of lucidity, but the voice smothers any attempt. Reason is a luxury you cannot afford. You have surrendered, even if you have not yet realized it. The world outside continues its bright, oblivious march, while you sit here, mind seeping into a blackened puddle of self-destruction. I become hyper-aware of my own heartbeat, its rhythm distorted, each thud ringing like a hammer on a tombstone. I can feel the blood rushing to the veins of my hands, thick and sluggish, as if the rivers inside me have been clogged with sludge. My beat is no longer a sign of life. It is a metronome marking the inexorable progression of rot. Paranoia tightens its grip. In the kitchen, the sink's faucet drips a single, slow tap that mimics a metronome. I stare at the water droplets, each one catching the dim lamplight, turning into a tiny eye watching me. I hear whispers through the waltz indistinct, yet unmistakably critical. They say I am unhinged, that I am a danger. I am both the patient and the executioner. Sometimes, I feel them more than I feel my own breath. The night stretches, an endless corridor. I walk the hallway, my footfalls reverberating as if each step crushes a fragile bone beneath the carpet. I press a trembling hand against the plaster and feel the texture of cold, a surface that seems to beat in time with my thoughts. I cannot tell whether I am touching the building or the swollen membrane of my own mind. At the end of the hallway, a cracked mirror leans against the wall. I stare into it, expecting to see a hollowed-eyed man, but instead I see a composite of all my past selves. The carefree boy who once promised a future, the grieving husband who watched a loved one slip away, the butcher who slit throats without remorse, the hermit who whispered to a phantom voice, the man now rotting from the inside. The image ripples, dissolving into a pool of black liquid that threatens to overflow. A sudden urge overtakes me and need to externalize the rotting, to watch it spill out of me in some visceral, undeniable way. I grasp a kitchen knife, its blade catching the faint glimmer of the streetlight that filters through the cracked blinds. My breath catches. My heart becomes a frantic drum, my mind a chaotic storm of fear, self-loathe, and the ever-present voice urging me onward. The blade meets my forearm. The flesh parts with a wet snap, a gush of blood flowing, thick and dark as tar, painting the floor in a crimson stain that spreads like a spreading disease. The sound of the cut is a hush, a sudden termination of perpetual buzzing in my ears. The pain is sharp, searing, a fire that ignites the nerve endings that have grown dulled and numb from years of internal decay. I watch my blood pool, the surface bubbling as if something beneath is trying to climb out. The voice cackles, a sinister melody. Now see the rot, my child. I stare at the spreading stain. It resembles a colony of fungi, expanding, devouring the wood grain beneath. Each drop of blood is a seed, each shimmer a spore. The floorboards themselves seem to breathe, the grain swelling as if they, too, have been infected. I hear the whisper of my own thoughts turning sour, a taste like spoiled milk lingering on the tongue. The rot is no longer abstract. It has taken physical form, spreading from my wound to the floor, from the floor to walls, as if the building itself is being consumed from within. At that instant, a chilling clarity pierces a fog. The rot is not merely in my head or my body. It is the entire architecture of my existence. The apartment, the city, the people who pass by, the blood-stained memories all are vessels for the same decay. The voice, once a whisper in my skull, is now an omnipresent aftertone in every cracked window, every flickering street lamp, every distant siren. It does not care that I am the source. It thrives on my surrender, on my willingness to allow it to fester unabated. I sink to my knees, the wooden floor cold against my thighs. My hands, slick with blood, tremble as they clutch at the splintered fragment of the mirror. I can see the cracks radiating outward, a spider's web of fissures that map the way the rot has infiltrated. My reflection wavers me eyes are empty hollows, my mouth a ragged slash, my skin a pallid, watery hue. The voice whispers finality. You are complete. The rot has taken its due. A wave of nausea rises, heavy and sour, as if my stomach itself is curdling. I taste iron, sweat, bile, all the flavors of a body that has been turned inside out. My mind, once a cacophony of self-justification, now hums with a single tonal low, resonant hum that seems to emanate from the very floorboards beneath me. It vibrates through my bones, reverberates behind my eyes. I close my eyes, struggling to summon any thought that is not the rot, any memory that is not tinted with blood. A tiny ember of defiant thought flickers. I will not become the tenebrous gloom. The ember sputters, caught in the wind of the voice, and dies. When I open my eyes, the room has shifted. The shadows have coalesced into vague, humanoid shapes, perhaps figments of my own corruption. Perhaps the city's in different gaze. They watch, perched on the edge of my vision, waiting. I realize that they are not villains. They are simply the inevitable spectators to my disintegration. Paranoia parades across my mind. Do they know? Are they conspirators? I cannot discern whether the whispering from the wall is in resonance of the voice or the distant hum of the city's machinery. The line blurs, and I am left standing at the intersection of personal apocalypse and urban anonymity. I think of the future, if there is any off, how this rot will continue to disintegrate me. Will my mind dissolve into a puddle of black thought, forever seeping into the walls? Will the city eventually swallow my remains, my blood, my memory, and grind them into the dust that fuels its endless engine? The thought terrifies me more than any physical pain. Yet somewhere, deep in the marrow of my chest, a strange, almost reverent feeling persists, and appreciation for the elegance of decay. Each cell that dies, each synapse that withers, each memory that crumbles, contributes to a macabre tapestry. There's a perverse beauty in the inevitability, a certainty that nothing can be salvaged, and the rot embraces me with open arms, whispering promises of release, of final quiet. I exhale, and the breath I release smells faintly of rot and rain on stone. I hear the voice softly say, "Rest now, my child." The words are a lullaby, and I, trembling and broken, crawl toward them, hoping that surrender will finally bring an end to this unending night. The night is still long. The rot is still spreading. I am still here, a vessel for its shadow, waiting for the inevitable surrender. Chapter 13, The Bridge Over Blackwater. I follow the river's low-pitched moan to the city's abandoned industrial quarter, the sound reverberating against soot-blackened brick and rusted girders. Every step I take stirs a plume of ash that clings to the soles of my shoes, a faint reminder that even the ground refuses to give me purchase. The sky above is a bruised violet, clouds thick enough to swallow the weak orange of streetlights. They press down like a shroud, squeezing the air until each breath feels like inhaling the belly of a dying beast. The bridge appears ahead of me, a skeletal structure of corroded steel, arches rising like the ribs of some colossal, unseen creature. Its deck is warped, boards splintered and missing, exposing the river below. The water does not reflect the dim sky. It is a viscous sheet of gloom, thick as oil, rippling only when a gust of wind stirs it, sending out slow, undulating waves that smell of rot, of decay, of something long buried and now resurfacing. I pause at the edge, my hand gripping a rusted railing that feels cold enough to freeze the blood in my veins. The railing trembles under my weight, as if the bridge itself is alive, and wary of the weight I place upon it. Below, the black water licks at the iron pilings, a slow, sucking motion that reminds me of the tongue of some monstrous leviathan tasting the world's sins. The voice inside my head, that lingering parasite I have come to recognize as a separate entity, whispers, "You stand on a threshold, child of grief." 1 foot forward and you embrace oblivion. 2 feet and you remain a corpse walking among the living. Its tone is both seductive and scathing, a lover's promise wrapped in a butcher's blade. I watch the water surface for a moment, trying to find a line of clarity, a point of reflection that might show me something beyond the endless dark. Instead, a glimmer surfaces an image of her face, distorted, features smeared like watercolor in rain, eyes vacant yet somehow burning with fierce, unuttered accusation. The image flickers, then vanishes, leaving only the memory of a breath that never returns. My mind spirals. The rot that has been eating away at my thoughts now feels like a physical parasite, a horde of insects crawling beneath my skin. The sensation of insects moving in and out of my flesh becomes almost tactile. I can hear the soft rasp of mandibles against bone, feel the tickle of tiny legs on a raw nerve. Paranoia sharpens, each thought slicing to the next, 1,000 knives in my cranium. I think of the night I cut the cat's throat, the slick of blood spreading across the alley's concrete like a dark flower. I think of the smell of the black liquid, I poured over the warehouse floor, the acrid vapor that seemed to swallow the light. I think of the knife I once pressed in my forearm, the scream that erupted from my throat, the scar that now blooms like a rose at the edge of a garden that never saw sunlight. All those moments converge into a single, unbearable pressure on my chest, a weight as heavy as the bridge's steel arches. A sudden, fierce wind sweeps through the gap between the superstructures, tearing away a few flaking paint chips that flutter down like dead birds. One of them lands on the water, sinks instantly, disappearing in a puff of black foam. I watch it vanish, and a cold certainty settles in my stomach. The water is not merely a river. It is a maw, a mouth waiting to devour anything foolish enough to fall within its grasp. The voice sharpens. You become the river's reflection, a monster fashioned from grief's ash. You can step forward and become the tide that drowns the world, or you can cling to the rails and watch the current erode everything you once were. Its words are not arguments. They are edicts, commands issued by an unseen ruler of my broken psyche. I look down at the railing. My knuckles are white, veins standing out like rivers on a map. The metal is slick with a thin film of rust and something darker old blood that has seeped into the joints, dried and cracked, flaking off in flakes as I press harder. As I tighten my grip, a sharp pain shoots up my forearm, a reminder that my muscles are trembling, that my heart is attempting to keep rhythm against a tide of madness. The river's blackness intensifies, as if sensing my hesitation. A faint, phosphorescent glow bubbles up from beneath the surface, an eerie, sickly green light that makes the water look alive, pulsing in rhythm with the thudding of my heart. The glow expands, revealing shapes moving just beneath shadows that shift like schools of fish, yet their outlines are not fish at all. They are elongated, serpentine, covered in translucent membranes that glisten in the eldritch luminescence. Their mouths are a row of needle-sharp teeth, and they glide toward the bridge with purposeful, predatory grace. A wave of nausea crashes over me, and I gag on a metallic taste of my own blood that seems to linger in my mouth, a taste that is not mine but belongs to the water, to the river that has swallowed countless souls and now lingers, waiting for mine. The bridge's arches creak as a distant thunder rolls over the city, but the sound does not carry to fog. It reverberates inside my skull like a dying drum. I step forward a single foot, the boards giving a cavernous thud beneath my weight. The wood splinters, a crack propagating outward, a small fracture that looks like a wound. The sound is a tiny scream, a splintered cry that seems a reverberation through the air, merging with the low hum of the water below. I pause, my breath ragged, eyes fixed on the black tide. The voice, now a hiss, seeps into my ears. You are already dead, hollowed out. The bridge is the last relic of your humanity step. And you become the shadow. Stay, and you become a prisoner of your own decay, forever watching the water eat the world. Memory floods me. Her laughter, bright as summer rain. The morning we made coffee together. The steam curling like ghostly fingers. The day her hand slipped from mine as she fell down the stairs in the shop. The sound of bone breaking. The gas that held the room still. The whiff of jasmine she used to wear floats through my mind, now mingled with the stench of rotting fish. The taste of those memories is both sweet and bitter, a reminder of a life that no longer exists. A sudden, blinding flash of insight strikes me like a blade through my brain. The bridge is not merely a structure, but metaphor for the final act of surrender. If I cross, I will become one with the abyss, the black water swallowing me, pulling my mind into the same rot that now clings to my thoughts. If I stay, I cement myself as a relic of what was, a condemned spirit haunting a world that continues its indifferent march. My foot hovers over the broken plank. The metal railing vibrates under my weight, resonating with the unspoken words that beat through my mind. Every instinct screams to flee, to retreat to the safety of the empty streets, to hide among the sanctioned facades of normalcy. Yet the tenebrous gloom in the water calls to me, a lure that promises an end to perpetual ache, a finality that would finally silence the voice that has haunted me since grief first took root. I hear a low gurgling beneath the surface, a sound not unlike the wet sigh of a throat being cut. The river's blackness seems to shift, forming a line of light that stretches in the water to the far side of the bridgeal line that glows like a vein of neon, illuminated by the phosphorescent creatures within the abyss. It beckons, an electric throb that reaches into my marrow, inviting me to walk the path to oblivion. I close my eyes. In the shadow behind my lids, a montage of all the fragments that have haunted me plays without pause. The scalpels gleam, the taste of blood on my tongue, the resonance of funeral dirges, the constant hissing of the voice that doubts, the sound of a child's laughter ringing from a memory I can no longer reach. All of these images coalesce into a single, horrifying and major reflection of myself standing upon the bridge, one foot across the water, the other still on the rusted planks, a silhouette split between two worlds, half submerged in black water that devours light. I open my eyes. My vision is fragmented by raindrops that have started falling, the sky finally letting loose a torrential downpour that slams against the steel arches with a deafening roar. The water beneath the bridge churns violently now, foam rising like pale ghosts, black currents swirling slower, as if the storm itself is a veil trying to mask the river's true nature. The voice growls, "Do not think you are choosing. You are merely following the path already laid out by your own ruin." The sound is no longer an internal whisper. It has become an external roar, amplified by the wind, the rain, the thunder, and omnipresent chorus that drowns out any other thought. My heart feels like a hammer, forging an iron chain between my ribs and my throat. I raise my right hand, its fingers trembling, and clutch the railing tighter, nails digging into the cold steel. A sudden surge of adrenaline spikes through perhaps a final fight, perhaps a final surrender. The muscles in my arms tingle, the skin on my forearm a shade paler than the night. Slowly I shift my weight, lifting my left foot onto the next broken plank. The wood splinters under pressure, a sharp crack snapping, like a bone breaking. A spray of black splatter erupts from the fissure, droplets falling into the black water, making new ripples that disappear into the abyss. I hear the distant sound of a siren fleeting, distorted, barely audible over the rain, reminding me that the city beyond the bridge continues to exist, unaware of whatever decision I am about to make. The wind tears a fragment of my coat, sending it sailing into the gloom. It flutters for a heartbeat over the river, then is swallowed whole, disappearing into the endless black. As if the river is a living beast, it stretches a tendril of black water toward the bridge, a dark finger reaching for me, curling around the broken rail. A chilling realization hits me. I am already part of the river. The rot that has been eating my mind has seeped into my bloodstream, a toxin that has turned my blood into something that the water could taste. The black water is no longer an external entity. It is an extension of my own internal decay. I take a deep breath, feeling my lungs filled with the rain-laden air, the scent of ozone, the metallic bite of my own blood. I step forward again, onto a plank that seems to be disappearing beneath my foot, as if the bridge itself is dissolving, the wood turning to mist. The rail vibrates, a low keening that matches the rhythm of my heart. In that instant, a sudden flash of clarity pierces through the haze. This bridge is not a conduit for death, but a crucible. Crossing will not merely end my suffering. It will transfer the rot, the guilt, the misery, the accumulated blackness into a form that will flow downstream, seeding other places with the same decay. The river will carry it to the sea, to other cities, to another world that still pretends to be bright. The voice, now a desperate howl, screams, do not become the source. Yet I realize that the voice is part of the rot, an aspect of my own despair. If I refuse to cross, I will remain trapped on this bridge, a haunting specter attached to a structure that rots under the weight of its own neglect, a man whose life has become a perpetual limbo between staying and leaping. The only way forward is to act, to decide whether the weight of my existence will be lifted by surrender or by perpetual stagnation. My left foot slips, the plank crumbling under my weight, sending a cascade of splintered wood plummeting into the black water. The splash creates a vortex, a swirling eddy that pulls at my boot like the throat of some conscripted beast. I feel my boot snag, the laces entangled with the broken rail, an invisible hand tightening, as if the bridge wants to keep me bound. Instinctively, I pull my leg back, but the rails, slick with rain and rust, refuse to release their grip. The metal feels like ice, biting into my skin, frost forming where it contacts my flesh. My other leg, however, is already balanced on a waning plank. The beam creaks ominously and the wind howls, threatening to dislodge it entirely. I realize if I let go, I will tumble into the black water beneath, the oceanic maw that threatens to swallow me whole. A scream, not mine, erupts from the Watera guttural, pulsating howl that seems to reverberate to the foundations of the bridge itself. The sound is hair-raising, as if the river itself is alive, aware, angry, and waiting for the moment I might become its next offering. I close my eyes once more, feeling the rain hit my face, the wind shredding my thoughts, the rot gnawing at the edges of my consciousness. I recall in a fleeting flash a line from an old poem I once loved. And when the tenebrous gloom comes, we must choose to become its light or become its ash. The phrase feels like a key, a barometer for what I truly desire. Light, ash. I cannot hear the voice any longer. It has been swallowed by the roar of the river. A sudden surge of resolve cracks through the rot, a pure, sharp edge that cuts through the fog of despair. I push my left foot forward, forcing my weight onto the wavering plank. The wood gives way, snapping like a dry branch struck by a hammer. I feel a surreal sensation of falling, of weightlessness, of being untethered from the world that has kept me shackled in grief. The air rushes past me, an angry gust filled with metallic tang of blood and the sweet rot of decomposing flesh. The water rises up, black as night, its surface breaking with the roar of the plunge. My arms flail instinctively, hands grasping at air at the railing at nothing. I feel the chill of the water engulf me bone deep as I enter its depths, the black mass enveloping me like a shroud, wetting me to the abyss. The bridge dissolves behind me as if receding into a forgotten memory. The steel arches crumble into rusted fragments. The planks turn to ash that disappears on the wind. From beneath the surface, the river's phantom creatures flare into being, their glowing eyes bright in the utter blackness. They coil around my limbs, their teeth gently probing, their bodies slick, inviting a desensitized fire that spreads through me, a sensation both pain and release. I am no longer a prisoner of my own thoughts. I have become the river's conduit. The rot that had once infected my mind now mingles with the black water, spreading outward, a silent, invisible pathogen that will seep into the soil, the streets, the hearts of those who continue to walk the city's streets oblivious to the infection lurking beneath. I feel my own consciousness fraying, fibers unspooling, drifting with the water's current. Thoughts become droplets, memories become eddies that swirl and dissolve, each one a whisper lost to the blackness. Yet for a fleeting second, as the river pulls me deeper, a strange peace settles on the surface of my mind. The clamor of the internal voice fades, replaced by the low, steady beat of the water. The rot that once festered inside me becomes part of a larger organism, a tide that can no longer be isolated, no longer contained within a single skull. I am both the source and the victim, the enzyme and the substrate, the decay that fuels further decay. From the far bank, the distant city lights flicker like dying fireflies, oblivious to the tide that now carries my unsettling legacy. I watch a lone figure on the opposite shore, his silhouette framed against a distant billboard that reads live, "Love, be." He does not see the black surge that rises around the bridge's remnants, now mere floating debris, and he does not notice the tendrils of rot extending outward, seeking new footholds. The rain intensifies, driving sheets of water against the surface, turning the black river into a torrential brown sludge. The river churns, a colossal beast lashing, paling the distant skyline. I can hear the city's sirens wailing somewhere far away, the blender of horns, the murmur of people inside warm apartments, the sound of a television playing an infomercial that speaks of clean air filters while the air outside is poisoned with my own internal decay. My final breath rises as a faint bubble, breaking on the surface of the black water, before sinking into the collective emptiness. The bubble shatters into countless smaller bubbles, each one carrying a fragment of my story, of the grief that drove me to this end. As the bubble disappears, its remnants scatter like ash across the black expanse, taken within the essence of man who became a bridge, whose steps were measured in broken wood, whose thoughts were haunted by a voice that could not be silenced, and whose final act was to surrender to the shadow that had always lived inside. And then, as the river continues its unending march toward the sea, the water clears for a moment, a thin veil of silver glimmering underneath the churn, hinting at the possibility that somewhere, far beyond the scope of my own contaminated mind, a sunrise might still be waiting to rise above a world that has never truly noticed the depth of my gloom. I am no longer here. I have become the river, the rot, the black water that keeps moving, forever crossing over the bridge that no longer exists. The night is endless, the water endless, and the blackness that remains is now a tide that will never cease. Chapter 14. The day I stopped believing in tomorrow. The sky outside my cracked window remains a bruise-colored slab, a heavy lid that refuses to split. Light never pierces a thick haze. Instead, a dim phosphorescence throbs, as if some distant organism were breathing through the clouds. I stare at the unyielding gray, waiting for an hour that will never arrive, feeling the throb of the world beat against my ribcage like a drum still reverberating a funeral march. My thoughts have become a stagnant swamp. Ideas surface as bloated bubbles that burst before they can form, leaving only a sour aftertaste of decay. The mental chatter that once filled the space between seconds now drifts like dead leaves on a silent river reach, one a reminder that the river never reaches a mouth. Hope, once a flickering candle perched on a windowsill, has been snuffed by a gust of wind that never left. I rise from the threadbare couch, joints protesting with a creak that sounds identical to the sigh of a dying animal. My feet touch the cold floorboards, though it exhales a faint odor of mildew and rust, an odor that seems to seep into my bones. I shuffle toward the kitchen, where the stale smell of yesterday's coffee clings to the air like a ghost that refuses to be exorcised. The kettle sits mute, its empty belly reflecting the dim light like a black eye. I pick up a photograph that has been leaning against the refrigerator for months, a snapshot of a winter evening, her smile frozen in amber. My thumb traces the outline of her face, feeling the raised grain of the paper, a tactile memory that suddenly feels foreign. I place the image on the counter and, with a single swift motion, fling it against the wall. The glass shatters, scattering jagged shards across the floor, each fragment catching a sliver of the oppressive gloom and turning it into a glittering warning. Blood does not spill. Instead, a cold abstraction of regret seeps into the cracks, staining the plaster in an almost imperceptible violet hue. My mind, already fractured, begins to fray at the edges. Thought patterns collapse, one after another, like paper torn into shreds by a relentless wind. The voice inside my head that once argued with me now simply repeats a single phrase in a monotone chant. Silence is eternal. The chant, like a mantra, reverberates within me, embedding itself deeper each time, eroding any remnants of hope, any flicker of resistance. A cold realization settles over me. The scream was never a release. It was a signal to the universe that something within me had finally cracked open, that an abyss was exposing itself. The silence that followed is not a cure, but a confirmation that the abyss is now complete, that there is no longer a barrier between the abyss and my consciousness. The shadow is no longer a wall. It is a doorway that has been ripped off its hinges, leaving a gaping chasm into which my thoughts are being drawn, one by one, into an external emptiness that does not give back. I attempt one final act of defiance. I pull the kitchen knife from the drawer, the edge still glistening with the faint, dried remnants of earlier blood, and I press the tip against the palm of my left hand. The pain is sharp, immediate, a bright flare in a world that has otherwise been dimmed to monotone gray. The pain radiates, a sudden, searing rhythm that briefly awakens the nerves of my hand, a flash of sensation that feels almost alive. Yet even this liveliness is swallowed by the surroundings. The sensation is a solitary spark in an ocean of night, the vapor which evaporates before it can ignite any lasting flame. When the pain subsides, the silence returns, thicker than before, more absolute, as if the very act of feeling had been a short-lived illusion. The gloom of my thoughts constricts, compressing like a fist around the last warm ember of my spirit. The only sound I can hear now is the distant, faint ticking of the hallway clock, a ritualistic metronome that marks the passing of time that refuses to grant me any reprieve. Each tick reverberates in my skull, a cruel reminder that while I am trapped in this cloying hush, the world continues its indifferent march. I curl back onto the floor, the coldness of the concrete seeping through my clothes, and stare up at the cracked ceiling. In the cracks, I can make out a faint pattern, like the veins of a leaf, a network that looks eerily similar to the neural pathways that once carried my thoughts. The pattern throbs faintly, as if the building itself is breathing, exhaling a breath that carries no sound, only a sensation of moving air against my skin. The silence after the scream has become a landscape of barren, endless plain where the only wind is the hiss of my own breath, and the only horizon is the darkened edge of the mirror that reflects a man who has lost the ability to hear his own name spoken aloud. In this desolate expanse, every step I take is amplified by the emptiness. Every heartbeat becomes a drumbeat of a funeral that has no mourners. I understand now that the most dangerous moments are not the screams that rupture the night, but the quiet that follows quiet that swallows a scream, that memorizes it without releasing it, that stores in the fold of mind that is already rotting, that makes the emptiness feel alive. The silence is a predator, patient and unseen, waiting for the next reverberation to consume. With a final, resigned breath, I close my eyes once more, allowing the blackness to seep through the shells of my thoughts, to become the only thing that remains constant in this endless night. The scream has vanished, but its resonance lingers in the cavernous hush that now houses me, a reminder that the chasm is louder than any cry I could ever make. Chapter 16, The Weight of Breathing. I lay on the cemented floor, the ache in my ribs a leaden tide that pulls each inhale down like an anchor dragging a sunken ship. The air that enters my lungs is thick, as if some unseen pollutant has settled into the atmosphere, coating each breath with a metallic bite of old blood. When the first gas arrives, a pressure builds behind my sternum, a weight that forces my diaphragm to labor against an invisible wall. My chest rises, collapses, repeats. The motion becomes a ritual of endurance, a cruel reminder that survival itself bears the cost of a perpetual grind. I try to focus on the rhythm, counting 1, 2, 3 in an effort to tether the surge to something stable. The numbers dissolve as soon as they appear, swallowed by the same vacancy that devoured my scream. I feel the rhythm of the hallway clock in my ears. It's ticking a metronome that underscores each strained suck of air. The hallway lights flicker, casting jagged shadows that crawl across the cracked plaster. They move with the same sluggish grace as my breathing, as if the gloom itself is synchronizing its beat with mine. I watch a loose stone tumble from the wall, striking the floor with muted thump. The sound is muffled, as though the very walls have become porous, allowing vibrations only to decay before reaching my ears. My fingertips brush the cold metal of the rusted railing beside the bridge I once stood upon. The steel is slick with condensation, each droplet a tiny mirror that reflects the dim glow of the street lamp above. I press my palm against it, hoping the surface will offer a glimmer of stability, but the metal vibrates with a low hum that resonates through my bones, amplifying the sensation of each inhalation. The rot that has infected my thoughts now leaks into my body. It spreads through veins like a slow-moving fungus, coating the interior of my lungs with thin film that makes each gas feel as though I'm inhaling ash. The ash settles on my tongue, a gritty residue that turns speech into a rasp, a whisper that never quite forms. I look up at the ceiling, where cracks spider across the plaster like veins. They seem to rhythm in time with my breathing, a visual aftertone of the invisible weight that presses upon my lungs. I imagine the cracks widening, becoming fissures to which the shadow below can rise, pouring into the room, filling the space with an even thicker gloom. A sudden shiver runs through my spine, a chill that is not the result of temperature, but of the mental fatigue that has settled like a stone upon my shoulders. The fatigue is not merely bodily. It is an exhaustion of purpose, a depletion of every ounce of will to continue. The thought of survival becomes a word that hangs in the air, heavy and meaningless. I reach for the kitchen drawer, the same one that has housed the rusted scissors for weeks. My fingers curl around the cold handle, the metal biting into my skin, sending a sharp jolt that snaps my focus away from the oppressive weight of breathing. I pull the drawer open. Inside lies a battered notebook, its pages yellowed, its margins filled with frantic scribbles, names, dates, fragments of conversations that no longer belong to anyone but me. I flip through the pages, each line a testament to an attempt at order, a futile construction of meaning amidst the entropy that surrounds me. The ink is smudged, some words illegible, as if the very act of writing has been corrupted by the rot that now seeps through every pore. I slide my thumb across a line that reads, "Tomorrow will be different." The promise feels like a lie whispered by a stranger. I snap the notebook shut, the sound startling in the silence, a crack that aftertones through the empty room. The clang reverberates off the walls, a reminder that even the smallest noise can cut to the chasm, if only for an instant. I set the notebook aside and stare again at the railing, at the black water that clings to the bridge's foundations, at the river that once threatened to swallow me whole. The river has not moved. It remains a dark membrane, an invisible barrier that reflects no stars, no moon, no future. Yet every time I think of crossing, of letting the water claim me, I feel a strange compulsion to step forward, to surrender the weight of each inhalation to the cold tide. The notion of escape is intoxicating, but the very act of considering it adds another stone to my chest, making each breath even more laborious. My mind flickers to the night. I poured the black liquid across the warehouse floor, the way it seeped into the cracks of the concrete, the way it swallowed all light that dared to rise. That memory returns with sour aftertaste, a reminder that the tenebrous gloom I produce is not a vacancy. It is a substance, a living poison that spreads, that clings, that refuses to dissipate. I sit back against the wall, my spine pressed into the cold brick, feeling the vibrations of the building to the skin of my cheek. The vibrations are faint, yet they remind me that the structure is still standing, still bearing weight, still supporting something, even if that something is me, an empty husk. I close my eyes, trying to block out the sense of oppression. The tenebrous gloom behind my lids is not a sanctuary. It is a canvas on which my thoughts are projected in bright, grotesque detail. I see myself walking along the bridge, each step reverberating like a drumbeat, each footfall matching the rhythm of my heart, each breath a wave that crashes upon the abyss below. A thin, high-pitched whine rises from my throat, an involuntary gasp that seems to outgrow my lungs, a sound that feels more like a crack in the air than a vocalization. The whine reverberates, spirals, and then is consumed by the same absolute hush that followed my scream. The silence is heavier now, as though it has ingested the sound and become denser, pressing against my eardrums with a force that feels almost physical. I open my eyes and stare at the floorboards. The wood is warped, splintered. Every crack resembles a wound that is not yet healed. I imagine the cracks widening, allowing the shadow beneath to rise, to fill the room, to join with a breath that already feels like an intake of ash. I rise, my joints protesting with a creak that merges with the ticking of the hallway clock. My steps are deliberate. Each footfall a small rebellion against the crushing weight that each inhalation imposes. I make my way toward the balcony door, a portal that has been locked for weeks. The metal latch is cold, stubborn. I force it open, the hinges screaming in protest. Beyond the door, the city stretches out, a lattice of neon veins and distant sirens. The wind that brushes my face carries a scent of rain mixed with rust, with iron, with a faint, lingering perfume of the woman whose absence still haunts me. I inhale, and the wind tastes like iron filings sharp, grinding against my tongue, leaving a metallic linger that refuses to dissolve. The night sky is a sheet of bruised clouds, no stars to guide, no moon to illuminate. The street below is slick, reflecting the glow of the few remaining streetlights. Their light is weak, as if the world itself is dimming in response to my breathlessness. I stand at the railing, my hands gripping the cold metal, feeling the vibrations travel up my arms, into my shoulders, into my chest where the weight seems to condense into a single, unyielding knot. I think of the phrase, the weight of breathing. It was once a metaphor, a poetic way to describe the heaviness of grief. Now it is literal, a granite slab I must lift with every inhale, a stone that crushes my ribs each time I draw air into my lungs. The thought of laying down, of letting the weight collapse entirely, becomes an alluring invitation to surrender to the abyss that has already claimed the sound of my scream. I lower my head, eyes closed. The wind bites at my cheeks, the cold seeping to the thin shirt I still wear. My breath comes in ragged bursts, each exhalation leaving a faint mist that dissipates before it can cling to anything. The mist feels like a ghost of the scream, a reminder that even silence can be full of motion. A sudden, sharp pain spikes in my left side, a contraction that feels as if a needle has pierced my lung. I gasp, a desperate, high-pitched intake that cracks the silence like a glass shattering. The pain is brief, then subsides, leaving behind a dull, throbbing ache that continues to remind me that my body is a battlefield, that every organ has become a trap for the tenebrous gloom that I cannot escape. I force another breath, the effort monumental, the air feeling as though it were drawn through a sieve, each molecule fighting to pass. The effort leaves my shoulders trembling, my arms trembling, my whole frame shaking in a way that seems almost animalistic. The animal inside me recoils, the human part begs for relief, and the phantom part merely watches, indifferent. Eventually, the wind dies, the city lights flicker out one by one, leaving a blanket of black that swallows the ground and the sky alike. The night becomes a vast black ocean, its surface still, its depth unfathomable. I stand at the edge, feeling the weight of each breath as if I were dragging a boulder across a barren plain. A tiny voice seemed no longer the mocking adversary that taunted me, but a soft, almost compassionate whisper slides through the heavy air. You cannot outrun the weight. You can only let it become part of you. The words are not comforting. They are an observation, a cold fact presented by a mind that has long since stopped distinguishing between kindness and cruelty. I raise my arms, palms open, as if to catch the weight that presses upon me, as if offer a place to settle. The air remains thick, unyielding, refusing to yield even a single particle of relief. It is as though the blackness itself has taken on the shape of the breath. Each inhalation a pact, each exhalation a surrender. My thoughts drift back to the bridge, to the black water, to the night when the scream was silenced. All those moments have led to this, a heart that beats not for life, but to keep the atmosphere inside my chest from collapsing entirely. The weight of breathing has become the weight of existing, a burden so profound it threatens to crush the last ember of what I once called self. I let the night swallow me whole, allowing the breath that has become a burden to linger, to settle, to become part of the blackness that surrounds me. The city continues its indifferent hum below. The river maintains its black surface. The bridge remains a ruined skeleton against a bruised sky. I am perched on the edge, caught between a breath that feels like a stone and a silence that feels louder than any scream. And so, the weight presses on, relentless, unforgiving, a reminder that even the simple act of staying alive can become a cruel execution. Chapter 17. The grave inside my chest. The night has settled on my ribs like cold masonry. Each inhalation a tremor that reverberates through a vacant I have been digging for weeks without ever seeing the surface. I lie on the floor, my spine pressed against the cracked plaster, as though the wall might absorb the ache that blooms within my sternum. My palm presses against the left side of my rib cage, feeling a faint indentation where the flesh is thinned, a shallow groove that resembles the carved name of a tombstone. It starts with a sensation subtle, almost imperceptible of a pressure building beneath the ribs, as if tiny hands were shoveling soil into a cavity that should never have existed. The first grain of earth is cold, gritty, clinging to my skin like a stray fragment of glass. With each breath, a new layer settles, compacting, solidifying, turning the space into a cramped burial chamber. The act of drawing air becomes a forced labor, a ritual of interment that at once sustains and condemns me. I close my eyes and watch the gloom behind my lids expand, a vast subterranean crypt lit only by the flickering phosphorescence of distant memories. In that dim vault, I see a row of coffins, each one bearing my own featureless face, each lid slightly ajar, as though some unseen presence is trying to climb out. The scent of damp earth rises from the soil that now clings to my lungs. It is a smell that belongs to graves, to rain that has seeped into freshly turned dirt, to the iron tang of blood that has long since clothed my veins. The voice inside my head, once a whisper, now a guttural chant haunts the chambers of this inner tomb. You become the caretaker of your own decay. It croons, the syllables dripping like stale rain on stone. Every heartbeat is a reverberation of the hammer that drives the final nail into your own coffin. Its cadence is relentless. Each phrase a shovel striking the earth, each pause a moment for the soil to settle. I try to resist, to lift my hand and scrape away the compacted earth, but the sensation of removal is no less painful than the act of adding. The soil adheres to my fingertips in a tenacious grip, as if the ground itself wishes to claim me. When I pry the particles loose, they fall to the floor in a slow cascade, forming a dark puddle that spreads across the worn boards, dark as ink, absorbing the faint light that manages to leak through the cracked window. My heart, once a steady drum that propelled me through ordinary days, now beats like a funeral procession marching through a fog-filled cemetery. With each thump a mournful toll rings, a low resonant clang that feels as though it is striking a bell buried beneath layers of silt. I feel the rhythm reverberation back at me from the soil lodged in my chest, a feedback loop of sorrow that never ceases. There's a peculiar weight to my breath now, not merely the heaviness of the air, but the sensation of inhaling the very earth that surrounds my soul. As I draw in, tiny particles of dust cling to the alveoli, turning each exhalation into a cloud of fine ash that drifts upward only to settle again on the walls of my imagination. The process is merciless. Life, as defined by the simple act of respiration, is forced to coexist with burial. I rise slowly, joints creaking like old floorboards, and shuffle toward a mirror that hangs crookedly on the opposite wall. The glass is clouded with grime, the surface pitted as if struck repeatedly by a chisel. I press my forehead against it, feeling the chill of the reflective surface. My reflection appears fragmented, a mosaic of broken pieces, each shard containing a different stage of my deterioration. The fresh wound of loss, the creeping rot of paranoia, the gaping abyss where hope once lived. In the center of that fractured visage, I see a dark cavity where my heart should sit, a vacant that glows faintly with an unearthly luminescence. A soft rustle behind me draws my attention to the cracked ceiling. A single droplet of water hangs from a loose plaster piece, trembling before it falls. When it finally releases, it lands on the floor with a muted splash, sending ripples through the pool of soil I have created. The sound is the only audible thing in the room, a quiet percussion that underscores a silence that has become louder than any scream. I crouch, reach the droplet, and watch as it slides down the side of the board, leaving a thin, dark trail reminiscent of a funeral procession winding its way through an overgrown path. The trail is a reminder that even the smallest, most mundane elements are now tainted by the gravestone weight that presses against my sternum. The corridor outside my apartment is alive with the ordinary thrum of the city distant sirens, muffled conversations, the occasional clang of a garbage truck. Yet those sounds feel like they belong to another world, a place where the dead never rise, where the living never notice the cemetery blooming inside their own bodies. I stand at the threshold, half expecting the hallway to open onto a field of fresh graves, each plot marked with my name. Instead, the hallway stretches forward, fluorescent lights flickering, casting a pallid glow that cannot illuminate the shadow within. I step back inside, feeling the weight of the earth in my chest as a physical presence, a stone that has been laid upon my sternum. The weight shifts, settles, rearranges like a fresh burial when the earth is compacted over a coffin. My breath becomes shallow, each intake a laborious effort to push new air through a tunnel that has become partially obstructed by the accumulating grime. In the corner of the room sits a battered wooden box. Its lid is cracked, hinges rusted. Inside lie pieces of torn newspaper clippings, headlines about missing persons, obituary for strangers I have never known, a photograph of a smiling couple whose faces are blurred, as if the paper has been soaked in rain. I pull one clipping free, the paper crumbling under my fingertips, and read the headline, "Local man loss of grief." The words feel like a confession inscribed on a tombstone, a public record of my private desolation. I fold the page, press it against a scar on my chest, feeling the texture of a newsprint against the rawness of the wound. It adheres, as though the paper itself wishes to become another layer of soil. The act of doing so feels like a ritual, an offering to the silent gods of decay that preside over my internal cemetery. A sudden, sharp pang thunders through my abdomen, a reminder that the burial has not been limited to the heart alone. It feels as though a funeral pyre has been lit beneath my ribs, the heat of it searing into my bones. Yet the fire is invisible, a mental blaze that consumes thoughts, leaving only ash. The ash settles in my mind, coating every memory, every fragment of who I used to be, turning them to a dull, powdery gray. I hear the voice again, softer this time, as though the invader has been muted by the sheer mass of earth that now occupies my chest. The grave is not an end, it murmurs. It is the beginning of another kind of existence, one where you are both the interment and the keeper. Its tone is dispassionately clinical. Yet there is an underlying glee, a satisfaction at the inevitability of my self-construction. I stare at my own hands, palms upturned, the skin between the knuckles cracked, the flesh pale and waxy as if it has been exposed to ancient light. The veins branch like the roots of a tree that has taken hold in the soil of my torso, each line a conduit for the slow, inexorable seepage of life into the dead ground that has taken residence inside me. I realize that I have become the cemetery I feared, that the grave within my chest is not a metaphor, but an actual space, expanding with every breath, filling with the detritus of my psyche. The interior tomb is not a silent sanctuary. It is a bustling necropolis populated by the husks of my former selves, the aftertones of promises broken, the ghostly silhouettes of hope that have been exhumed and discarded. My thoughts drift once more to the bridge over the Black River, to the moment I stood at the edge and felt the pull of the abyss. The water there was a mirror of what now roils inside me, a dark tide has seeped into my marrow. The grave within my chest is, in fact, the other shore of that same river, a place where the floodwater can finally settle, where the sediment will finally lie still. I close my eyes again and let the silence fill the empty space left by the voice's departure. The silence is not absence. It is a dense, viscous thing that settles like tar, coating every crevice of my thoughts, sealing them away beneath a layer of unyielding black. It is a quiet after a scream, the hush after a funeral, the stillness after a burial, yet hums with an undercurrent of something far more insidious. The promise that a grave inside my chest will never be filled, that the soil will continue to rise, that the weight will never cease. I sit, the floor beneath me cold and unfeeling, and I feel the tremor of my own heart resounding to the cavernous burial beneath my ribs. The rhythm is a dirge, a metronome marking the inexorable march toward an ever deeper abyss. I understand with a clarity that is both terrifying and oddly liberating that I have become both the corpse and the graveyard, the interred and the caretaker. The line between life and death has receded into the marrow, leaving only an empty aftertone that reverberates with each labored breath. And so, the grave within my chest expands, inexorably, forever consuming the remnants of who I once was. Chapter 18, The Edge of the World. I step on the roof of the derelict high-rise, the iron stairwell groaning beneath my boots as though the building itself resists my ascent. Above, a bruised sky hangs low, an endless sheet of bruised violet that refuses to bleed daylight. Below, the city spreads like a circuit board, blinking signs, flickering lampposts, streams of headlights, each point of artificial illumination a tiny rhythm in an otherwise static tableau. The wind presses against my cheeks, cold enough to sap the last warmth from my skin. It carries the scent of rust, of rain that has never fallen, of gasoline fumes that cling to the concrete like a lingering breath of decay. My hair lifts in thin tendrils, each strand of filament trembling with the same nervous energy that makes my heart thud against the ribs as though a hammer is trying to drive through a wall that was never meant to be breached. I reach the farthest edge, the narrow steel lip that fringes the roof's perimeter. The railing is a rusted skeleton, its bars warped, gaps yawn like the mouth of a great beast that has been half-eaten by time. Below the railing, the abyss yawns, a black expanse that swallows the horizon. It is not simply an absence of ground. It is a vacancy that seems to rhythm, a living membrane that hums with frequency that resonates in the marrow of my forearms. I place my palm on the cold metal, feeling the rivets press into the flesh of my hand. The surface vibrates faintly, as though the structure is transmitting a low, mournful note that reverberates through the steel and into the very nerves that snake up my arm. The vibration is a reminder that this place is not merely a height, but a threshold, a boundary where the ordinary laws of physics begin to fray, where the distinction between breathing and suffocating becomes a hairline crack. I close my eyes for a moment. The world behind my lid's a blank canvas on which memories project like static. I see her laughing in a sunlit kitchen, the way her shoulders rose with each breath, the way she would brush stray hairs from her face when she thought I was watching. I hear the soft clink of a spoon against a mug, the gentle hiss of steam rising from a pot of tea. Those images are warm, vivid, apparently alive. Yet they are anchored in a time that no longer exists, tethered to a past that has been submerged under layers of ash and blood. When I open my eyes again, the precipice stretches infinitely, the skyline dissolving into a horizon that is both distant and immediate. The world below feels like a painting that is being slowly stripped of its colors, each hue fading into grayscale. The buildings that once towered with confidence now appear to lean, their silhouettes warped, as though gravity itself is beginning to question its hold on them. A low rumble rolls through the concrete beneath my feet, a subterranean growl that seems to emanate from the foundations of the city. It is not an earthquake. It is a sigh, a tired exhale from the world that has carried the weight of so many dying hopes. The rumble vibrates through my soles, reminding me that even the earth beneath me is not immune to the erosion of time. The edge feels like a razor-thin line drawn with invisible ink. On one side, the persistence of pulsation, the drumbeat of existence. On the other, the cold embrace of non-being. My thoughts flicker, alternating between a fierce urge to step forward and a desperate clinging to the rail that might as well be a lifeline woven from rusted steel. I think of the bridge I once crossed, of the river that tried to swallow me whole, of the coffin that never held a body. Those memories converge into a single, oppressive weight that presses against my sternum, as if the grave I have been constructing inside my chest is now trying to break through skin and bone, to become an actual pit that could swallow the world above. A faint aftertone of the voice that has haunted me for months slithers back into my consciousness, its tone soft as a spider's silk, yet sharp enough to cut. You've stood on cliffs before, you've walked across rails, you have leaned into the dark water. This is merely another precipice, another choice to make. The world will continue to spin regardless of whether you step or stay. The words feel less like a plea and more like a verdict handed down by a judge who has long since forgotten the law. I lift my gaze to the city's neon arteries, their light flickering like fireflies caught in a jar. The streets below are wet with a thin sheen of rain that never truly falls, reflecting the artificial glow in a swath of oily mirrors that slide beneath the edges of my vision. The people moving beneath are silhouettes, shadows that flicker in and out of focus. Their lives ordinary, their breaths steady, their futures unmarked by the abyss that gnaws at my mind. A sudden surge of vertigo washes over me, the inner ear spinning as if the world is rotating on an axis I cannot locate. The sensation is accompanied by an inexplicable taste of copper, as if the blood that floods my veins now has a flavor different from the one that once sustained me. My throat tightens, making each inhalation feel like pulling a rope through a cracked pipe. The effort is both mechanical and existential, a reminder that my body is a vessel that can only hold so much pressure before it bursts. I bring my forearm forward, the steel railing cold against my skin, and press harder until the metal yields a faint, resonant tone, like a bell struck by a gloved hand. The sound reverberates across the roof, resounding off the concrete, then dissipates into the night, leaving behind a ringing that lingers in my ears longer than the note itself. It is a reminder that every action, no matter how minute, produces a ripple that can cascade outward. In that instant, time seems to stretch, the seconds elongating into a viscous river that flows slower than any heartbeat. My thoughts fracture, each fragment becoming a separate entity, each questioning the validity of the other. One fragment whispers that the edge is an illusion, that the world is merely a construct of neurons firing in patterns that mimic reality. Another fragment hisses that the vacancy below is the only true reality, the only place where the noise of existence ceases. I inhale a final breath, the air thick with the metallic tang that has become my constant companion. My lungs fill, the expansion of my chest feeling like a balloon being inflated beyond its capacity. As the breath reaches its apex, I feel a pressure building behind my eyes, a sensation akin to a wave cresting before it crashes upon a shore that does not exist. With a sudden, decisive motion, I release my grip on the railing, allowing the steel bar to slide free from my palm. For a heartbeat, the world tilts, the horizon spinning a full circle as if the universe were being turned like a wheel. My body moves forward in a slow, controlled ascent, the wind tearing at my clothing, the rusted bar clattering against the concrete as it slides down the incline of the roof's edge. My descent is not a free fall. The rusted railing catches intermittently, a jagged hand that pulls me back toward the safety of the roof only to release again. Each interruption a reminder of the thin line I tread. The sensation is both terrifying and oddly comforting. The alternating pull of metal against flesh ringing the tug-of-war between life's pull and death's release. When my body finally reaches the ground, the impact is softened by a thin veneer of broken glass and loose debris that have accumulated over years of neglect. The shock reverberates through my spine, the pain sharp, a searing flame that spreads at every joint, every nerve ending. I lie there for a moment, the grit of concrete against my cheek, the taste of dust in my mouth, the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in the quiet like a drum in an empty hall. Around me, the city continues its indifferent hum. Sirens wail in the distance. A car passes on a damp street. A faint music drifts from an open window. The world does not pause for my fall. It does not mourn. It simply exists, a vast tableau of motion that will inevitably swallow my tiny tragedy and replace it with the next anonymous narrative. I stare up at the sliver of sky that has been torn open by the roof's broken edge, a thin crescent of gloom that bears the faint glimmer of a dying star. The night's veil is thicker here, the abyss beyond it more oppressive, but the edge remains a place where the fabric of being is stretched to its limit, where the border between pulsation and silence thins to a whisper. In that whisper lies a choice unmade, a question unasked, whether to step again into the abyss, to surrender entirely to the black that has been gnawing at the marrow of my existence, or to crawl back toward a ruined building, to cling to the rusted railing, to survive another day in a world that has already decided I am already dead. For now, I remain on the ground, the cold concrete a burial mat beneath me, the wind moving debris like a slow funeral march. The edge behind me still glints with the promise of oblivion, a razor-thin line that could be crossed with a single breath, a single thought. The night presses in, the blackness within my chest expands, and the world outside continues, unyielding, indifferent, forever balanced on the verge of collapse. I close my eyes once more, letting the metallic taste of blood linger, feeling the weight of each inhale settle like a stone in a pocket already filled to bursting. The line between existence and non-existence has become a silhouette half-drawn, a contour that could be erased with the sweep of a single hand. I sit, poised on a precipice of my own making, waiting for the next tremor that will either pry the world apart or meld me back into its indifferent expanse. The edge of the world is not a place, he is a state. A breath, a fleeting moment when the universe pauses long enough to notice that a single soul teeters on its border, and then mercilessly, the pause passes and the world moves on. Chapter 19, The Truth I Cannot Elude. The battered filing unit leans against the far wall, its paint flaking away like dying skin. Hinges rusted to a stubborn, metallic sigh each time I yank the top compartment open. Inside, a chaotic jumble of paper piles itself in a loose, yellowed mound of kind of paperwork that has been shoved aside for years until it becomes a single, indistinguishable mass. My fingers find a folder labeled 06-2020, the adhesive strip faded, the ink smeared by countless fingertips. I pry the clasp loose, and a cascade of documents spills on the cracked floorboards, each sheet rustling like dry leaves stirred by an autumn gust. Among the loose sheets, a crumpled handwritten note catches the weak glow of the lone bulb hanging from the ceiling. The script is jagged, the ink blotchy, the words cramped as if written under a veil of panic. I can't keep lying. If the med stop shall die, I promise we'll have the money tomorrow. Please don't tell her. The sentence slams into my chest with the force of a hammer strike, sending a cold shock wave through my ribs. My beat spikes, thudding against the cavity of my heart like a frantic drum. The room seems to shrink, the plaster on the ceiling pressing in, the floor vibrating under the weight of that revelation. The memory erupts, vivid as a flash photograph. The night the storm hammered the city, rain pelting the cracked windows, thunder growling in the distance like a wounded beast. She is on the couch, skin pallid as moonlight, a thin blanket pulled tight around her shoulders. The plastic bottle of pills sits on the coffee table, its cap twisted open, the remaining capsules a handful of ghostly pearls glinting in the feeble light. She reaches for it with shaking fingers, eyes rimmed with shadow, voice barely more than a whisper. Just a little longer, please. I recall the stack of bills that had become a miniature mountain on the kitchen counter, government notices, stamped in red. The landlord's final warning taped to the refrigerator, a terse text from a utility company threatening disconnection. I had taken a second shift at the warehouse, the clang of steel crates reverberating through the cavernous space, the ache in my back a daily reminder that I was paying a price for every extra hour. When the storm intensified, a cold, hard resolve settled into my marrow. I slipped the last capsules beneath the worn floorboards, the concrete biting at my fingertips, the metal bottle clinking against the wood as I tucked it away. A plan, selfish and twisted, began to form. I would sell the pills later. The cash would pay the mounting debts, and the brief silence they bought would give me the illusion of control. The following evening, the house is suffused with the stale scent of boiled potatoes and bitter coffee, the air thick with metallic tinge of fear. She asks, voice soft but urgent, "Where are the pills?" I answer lie, voice flat, "The pharmacy called. There's a delay. They'll be here tomorrow." The deception is a flimsy veil, as thin as tissue paper, yet it clings to the room, staining the atmosphere. Hours later, the storm reaches a fever pitch. Lightning forks across the sky, each flash briefly exposing the cramped kitchen in stark white light. She awakens, clutching her abdomen, breathing shallow, skin slick with sweat. The pain erupts in jagged waves, a burning that sets her nerves alight, each surge more violent than the last. She reaches out, fingers white, eyes wide with terror, voice cracking. "Help me." Adrenaline spikes. My heart hammers. I dash to the phone, fingers trembling, the digits blurring as I dial 911. My voice shakes, words tumbling over one another. The dispatcher's calm tone is a distant hum against a frantic beat in my ears. An ambulance screeches through the rain-slick streets, sirens wailing like banshees, flashing red and blue lights, painting the wet pavement in frantic colors. Paramedics smash through the front door, their gloved hands glinting, faces concealed behind masks, the air around them a sterile chill. They move with practice efficiency, inserting 4 lines, delivering oxygen, checking vitals. The monitor's thin green line trembles between a steady rhythm and a flat line, each jitter a silent scream. The scent of disinfectant swirls with the coppery taste of blood that has begun to pool on the linoleum. She slips further into blackness. Her chest rises and falls shallowly, a rasping sound cutting through the incessant beeping. Her lips part, a ragged whisper escaping. Why? The question hangs heavy, a dagger aimed directly at my guilty conscience. I hear the frantic chatter of the medics, the urgent commands that cannot be silenced. In the emergency room, the fluorescent lights glare, sterile and unforgiving. Technicians read her ECG, the squiggles jittering, spelling out imminent failure. They push medication epinephrine, painkillers, everything that can coax a faltering heart to keep beating. She gasps, each inhalation a battle against the crushing weight of her own system collapsing. Her final breath is a sigh, a quiet surrender. Why? The resonance reverberates down the antiseptic hallway, a haunting refrain that embeds itself in the marrow of my being. The EMTs label the case accidental overdose. The police take a brief statement. The paperwork signed with shaking hands. The official report filed and sealed. The investigation stalls. The case grows cold. The official cause listed. The truth hidden in the shadows of bureaucracy. But inside me a different story festers. A rot that seeps into every vein, every neuron. The memory of the hidden capsules. The moment I press them into the floor, the frantic decisions driven by desperation each becomes an indelible scar etched deep into the marrow of my existence. The weight of that knowledge settles on my ribs like a solid lead, making each inhale feel like drawing air through a narrow straw. My throat constricts, the metallic tang of blood rising at the back of my mouth with every swallow a constant reminder of the breach I caused. The inner voice, once a mischievous whisper, now a relentless droning, repeats, "You chose. You caused." I sit at the kitchen table, the cracked mug empty, the steam from earlier long vanished. The notebook lies open before me, pages filled with fragmented thoughts, half-written verses, desperate attempts to make sense of an unmakeable tragedy. I turn to a fresh sheet, the paper cold beneath my fingertips, and write, I am the architect of this ruin. The ink spreads slowly, each stroke a confession, each letter another weight added to the stack of guilt already threatening to topple me. Outside the window, the city carries on some different rhythm. Cars pass, headlights slicing to the rain-slick streets. Strangers walk past my building without seeing the tenebrous gloom that clings to my silhouette. Neon signs flicker, casting a sickly glow that reflects off puddles, colors distorted like a painting seen through a dirty pane. Inside, the walls seem to close in, plaster cracking in places, exposing skeletal timber as if the building itself were breathing, exhaling the same stale air I inhale. The radiator hisses, a low, steady whisper that mirrors the sound of my own shallow breathing. I rise, shuffle down the hallway, the floorboards creaking beneath my weight. The corridor stretches ahead, a narrow passage lined with doors from ajar, revealing rooms filled with forgotten belongings, others shut, hiding secrets I am no longer brave enough to uncover. I pause before a door that has always been locked, its metal surface cold, a rusted padlock securing it. The key hangs on a nail, tarnished, teeth worn down by years of turning. I insert the key, feel the resistance twist, hear the faint click of the lock disengaging. The door swings open, revealing a thick, oppressive fog that rolls out like a black tide, filling the space with a cold that seeps into my bones. Within the mist a figure emerges, a silhouette that mirrors my shape but is darker, its edges blurred, eyes vacant pits that reflect nothing but an endless night. It glides forward, each step soundless, the air around it vibrating with a low, ominous hum. When it brushes my cheek, a chill runs through me, as if a phantom hand were pulling at the very fibers of my skin. I feel an icy fire, a sensation like frost burning deeper than any wound. The figure conveys a single, relentless truth without words. You chose. You caused. The phrase reverberates inside my mind, resonating with the rhythm of my heart. Each beat a drum reverberating the same accusation. I stumble back, the fog receding, the shadow thinning, leaving me alone in the hallway once more. The padlock snaps shut behind me, the key disappearing into its slot as if sealing the secret forever. Yet the secret is no longer hidden. It has been ripped free, a wound that will never close. Returning to the kitchen, the room remains unchanged, the same cracked mug, the same battered cabinet, all bearing silent testimony to my confession. I sit again at the table, the notebook open, my hand hovering over the pen. I write a final line. The truth sits heavy on my chest. I cannot flee it, nor can I silence it. The ink blots slightly where it meets the page, a small imperfection that mirrors a flaw now evident in every facet of my life. Night outside deepens, the sky a canvas of bruised ink, the horizon a thin line where clouds meet flickering streetlights. The wind whistles through the cracked window, a mournful song that rises and falls like my breath. I close my eyes. The gloom behind my lids is not an empty chasm, but a thick tapestry woven from regret, guilt, and the irrevocable act that set this chain of suffering in motion. In this silence, I understand that no amount of denial, no frantic distraction, no whispered prayer can erase the moment I chose profit over compassion, that my hands, oh trembling, were the ones that sealed her fate. The truth is a stone in my pocket. Pressing down with each step, I take across the endless, dim hallway of my days. I lift my head, stare once more at the weak glow of the hallway bulb, its light wavering, as if aware of the tenebrous gloom that clings to the room. The bulb hums, a low, steady tone that matches the rhythm of my own beat, a reminder that life continues to tick forward, indifferent to the secrets it harbors within its beating heart. And so I remain, pen in hand, the notebook open, the words spilling onto the page, each sentence a brick laid upon the foundation of my confession. Each line a step to a horizon that will never be illuminated, but will forever stand as the unalterable testament to the truth I cannot escape. Chapter 20, The Long Night That Never Ends. I awaken to a room that feels colder than the moonless sky outside, my breath forming thin clouds that cling to the cracked plaster as if the very walls were exhaling their own despair. I reach for the ragged blanket that lies draped across the floor, its frayed edges brushing my fingertips and sending a shiver through my spine, a reminder that even comfort has been stripped to tatters. I pull the blanket tight around my shoulders, the worn fabric pressing against my skin like a fragile armor against an invisible assault. I listen to the silence that has settled after the storm of revelations, a pressurized hush that presses against my eardrums, each quiet beat amplifying the reverberation of my own heartbeat. I note the thudding rhythm in my chest, a steady percussion that seems to mark the passage of an unending dusk. I focus on the sound of my own blood coursing through veins, the faint hiss of life that persists despite the weight of my guilt. I stare at the cracked mirror leaning against the far wall, its surface mottled with age and grime, the reflection fragmented into a kaleidoscope of distorted shards. I see a cavernous-eyed man whose face bears the imprint of countless sleepless nights, a mouth that trembles ever so slightly whenever the memory resurfaces. I recognize the gaunt silhouette as the product of choices made in tenebrous gloom, a creature that has become accustomed to existing within perpetual twilight. I recall the moment when the hidden pills slipped beneath the floorboards, the metallic clink that resonated in my hands, the bitter taste of desperation that lingered on my tongue. I remember the frantic scramble to conceal the evidence, the frantic heartbeat that thudded louder with each rusted nail I drove into the wooden slats. I acknowledged the mental arithmetic that calculated the cost of survival against the price of another's breath, the cold logic that justified betrayal. I replayed the ambulance's frantic arrival, the blaring sirens that shredded the night, the blue and red lights that painted the hallway in frantic strokes. I feel the oppressive weight of the paramedics' gloved hands as they worked with clinical precision, the sterile smell of antiseptic mingling with the metallic scent of spilled blood. I hear the monitor's flat line peppered with occasional blips, each one a phantom promise that hope might yet be resurrected. I watch the slow, inevitable decline of the woman I once loved, the pallor that spread across her cheeks like a thin veil of ash, the shallow inhalations that struggled against a tightening chest. I see her eyes dimming, the flicker of consciousness fading, as if a candle were being smothered by an unforgiving gust. I feel the crushing weight of the question she whispered while lodged permanently in my psyche, an accusation that reverberates through every waking moment. I remember the police report that labeled the incident an accidental overdose, the bureaucratic language that reduced a life-ending tragedy to a sterile classification. I glance at the half-filled file folder that bears my fingerprints, the ink smeared by a trembling hand, the half-written statement that I signed with shaky resolve. I realize that official paperwork will never capture the depth of my treachery, the hidden motives that lurk behind each deceptive gesture. I sit on the kitchen floor, the cracked tiles cool in my thighs, and I stare at the small, battered notebook that rests open beside me. Pages filled with frantic scribbles, half-finished verses, and raw confessions. I trace the ink with fingertip, feeling the raised letters as if they were the lingering scars of a wound that refuses to close. I write a new entry, each sentence a deliberate exhalation, each word a brick in the fortress of my own remorse. I pen the line. I have become the night that never yields, the tenebrous gloom that devours even the fleeting glimmers of morning. I feel the weight of those words settle on my chest, a heavier burden than any physical load, a gravity that demands constant attention. I close the notebook, the snap of the binding ringing like a final thud in an empty corridor. I rise, my joints creaking as I lean against the cold, metal railing that borders the balcony, its rusted bars biting into my palms. I pull myself upward, the thin wooden planks groaning under my weight, each step a reminder that the floor can support only so much before cracking. I step onto the narrow ledge, the wind snapping at my coat, the rain beginning to fall in thin, icy strands that sting my cheeks. I look out over the city, a sprawling tapestry of neon signs, flickering streetlights, and distant sirens that punctuate the night like mournful bells. I watch strangers hurry beneath umbrellas, their faces turned away, their lives moving forward as if oblivious to the black tide that ebbs beneath the surface of my existence. I notice a lone figure standing on a distant rooftop, a silhouette barely discernible against a hazy glow, and I wonder whether that other ghost shares my burden. I feel the wind whisper to the concrete, a low, mournful sigh that carries a scent of rain-slick asphalt and distant exhaust. I breathe it in, the cool air filling my lungs, but never reaching the sunken space where hope once lived. I exhale a plume of vapor that drifts upward, merging with the damp night, disappearing as quickly as the promise of respite. I contemplate the notion of escape, the idea of stepping over the railing, surrendering my body to the chasm below, allowing the black water to claim me as it once threatened to swallow the woman I loved. I imagine the plunge, the sensation of cold embracing flesh, the pressure of deep water crushing ribs, the final quiet that would finally mute the incessant accusations that aftertone within me. I pause, the urge to surrender momentarily eclipsed by a stubborn ember of curiosity that refuses to be extinguished. I realize that I have become a chronic observer of my own demise, a spectator perched on the edge, cataloging each sensation, each memory, each guilty thought with clinical detachment. I recognize that the blackness is transformed into a companion, an ever-present entity that walks beside me, whispering secrets in the folds of my mind. I turn away from the balcony, my feet finding the worn carpet of the hallway, the fibers prickling against my skin like tiny needles. I move toward the bedroom. The door closed behind me with a soft click, sealing off the external world and its indifferent bustle. I sit on the edge of the unmade bed, the springs groaning beneath my weight, and I stare at the black blanket draped across the mattress, its folds resembling the crests of a storm-tossed sea. I lift the blanket, exposing the worn mattress, the springs exposed like ribs of a long-dead animal, the scent of sweat and dust lingering in the air. I lie down, The cool linens brushing against my torso, the firmness of the mattress supported my body with a steady, unyielding presence. I closed my eyes, the blackness behind my lids thickening, as if the night itself were seeping into my mind, filling every crevice with an inky substance that refuses to disperse. I allow my thoughts to drift, the mental tide pulling me toward memories of happier day sunrise breakfasts, laughter shared over coffee, lazy afternoons spent reading in a sunlit garden. I sense each recollection slipping away like sand through clenched fists, the images blurring, the colors fading, the warmth turning to cold. I feel the inevitable erosion of nostalgia, the realization that those moments exist only as phantom impressions, incapable of sustaining the present. I resolve to embrace the permanence of night, to accept that the blackness is no longer a temporary eclipse, but an enduring landscape upon which I must navigate. I acknowledge that the weight of my conscience will never lift, that the ache will never subside, and that the knowledge of my betrayal is a fixed point in the geometry of my existence. I state to myself, I will no longer seek the illusion of dawn, for the horizon has been forever altered. I open my journal once more. Its page is still crisp despite the humidity in the room, and I write the final entry of this chapter, each sentence beginning with the same deliberate cadence that has become my mantra. I write, I have become a night that never ends, the endless shroud that muffles every cry, the silent witness to my own irreversible ruin. I feel the pen's tip scratch against the paper, the sound a small, persistent reminder that I am still capable of action, however futile it may seem. I close the journal, the snap of the cover ringing like a thunderclap in the quiet. I place the notebook on the nightstand, its presence a modest monument to confession I can no longer deny. I sit back against the headboard, my arms wrapped around my knees, and I stare at the ceiling where a single droplet of water has formed, the result of the recent rain seeping through a cracked tile. I watch the droplet linger before it slides down, leaving a dark streak that mirrors the path my thoughts have carved across my mind. I realize that each drop is a reminder that even in a world of perpetual night, subtle movements continue, small flows persist, and the passage of time is still measurable, albeit in muted increments. I accept that the night is my constant, that my existence is now defined by the cadence of these drips, the rhythm of my own breath, the thud of my heart, and the unending resonance of my own self-condemnation. I rise from bed, my joints stiff, and I make my way to the kitchen, the faint luminescence of the street outside casting a dim glow through the smeared window. I pour a glass of water, the liquid shimmering with an amber hue, and I watch the condensation form on the glass, each bead a tiny mirror reflecting the surrounding gloom. I lift the glass to my lips, feel the cool fluid slide down my throat, and I sense the brief momentary sensation of relief, however illusory, as if the water were washing away a fragment of the shadow. I set the glass down, the clink resonating like a tiny chime in the silence, and I stare at the empty countertop, the scratches and stains telling stories of countless nights spent wrestling with my own demons. I notice a small, cracked photograph tucked beneath a pile of dishes, its image fading, the colors muted, the faces barely recognizable. I pick it up, the paper brittle, and I stare at the smiling faces, the moment captured before the storm, before betrayal, before the night grew eternal. I place the photograph back where I found it, the act a symbolic gesture of returning the past to its proper place, acknowledging that it can no longer alter the present. I turn off the kitchen light, allowing the room to sink once more into the dim, amber glow of the street lamp filtering through the window. I close the fridge door, the soft thud ringing like a final note in a melancholic song. I retreat to the bedroom, the gloom now fully embraced, the world beyond the walls feeling like a distant memory. I pull the blanket over my shoulders once again, the fabric hugging my form, providing a modest barrier against the chill that has become a permanent resident of my bones. I lie on the mattress, the springs protesting under my weight, the bed frame creaking with each shift. I surrender tonight, allow its oppressive presence to wrap around my consciousness, the shadows seeping into every corner of my mind, the silence pressing against my ears, the blackness becoming the only constant in a world that once promised sunrise. I close my eyes, the blackness behind my lids thick and impenetrable, and I drift into a restless sleep, the reverberation of my own voice whispering, "I am the night." I awaken hours later to the faint sound of rain tapping against the window pane, a soft percussion that mirrors the steady beat of my heart. I smile faintly, a rueful twist of the lips, knowing that even the rain cannot cleanse the stain I have etched upon my soul. I sit up, the mattress protesting beneath me, and I stare at the gray sky, the world outside of muted watercolor clouds and distant silhouettes. I understand fully now that there is no looming horizon, no promise of dawn, no final chapter that offers redemption. I accept that the night will stretch infinitely, that the gloom will remain my companion, that each breath will be a reminder of the irreversible act that set this endless cycle in motion. I resolve to live within this perpetual twilight, to navigate its treacherous terrain with the knowledge that I've already crossed a point of no return. I stand, the floorboards creaking beneath my feet, and I walk toward the small wooden table where my journal lies, its pages waiting for the next confession. I open it, the crisp paper inviting my pen once more. I begin a new entry, each sentence a deliberate acknowledgement of the unending night, each word a testament to the acceptance that has become my only refuge. I write, I have learned to breathe in blackness, to find solace in its oppressive embrace, to carry the weight of my choices, as if they were a mantle I cannot discard. I set the pen down, the ink drying slowly, and I close the journal, feeling the finality of this act as though sealing a contract with the night itself. I rise, my silhouette merging with the shadows that now define every contour of my existence, and I step out into the dim hallway, the muted glow of the hallway bulb casting elongated shadows that dance along the cracked walls. I walk toward the front door, the metal knob cold against my palm, and I pause, listening to the wind outside, a mournful howl that seems to reverberation the chorus of all the lives I have touched, all the ones I have failed. I turn the knob, the door swinging open with a soft creak, revealing the rain-slick street illuminated by distant neon. I step onto the wet pavement, the droplets splashing under my feet, the rain soaking my coat, the cold seeping through to my bones. I lift my head, the sky a black expanse, endless stars obscured by clouds, the universe indifferent to my solitary pilgrimage. I walk forward, each step an affirmation that I will continue to exist within this dark expanse, that I will bear my burden without hope of sunrise, that I will endure the long night that never ends. I understand that there is no end point and no salvation, only the unbroken continuity of a night that has become my identity. I accept that this acceptance is not a surrender to defeat, but a recognition of the immutable reality I have created. I whisper to the empty wind, I am the night, and the night is me. I continue onward, the rain a steady percussion on the streets, the city lights flickering like dying embers, the blackness enveloping me entirely, and I know that my story will never reach a bright conclusion, never find a sunrise, but will persist unyielding within the shadows that have claimed me forever. Epilogue. As I walk this world alone, I understand that grief does not end. It only becomes a landscape of the life I must continue walking through. Grief does not always remain grief. Sometimes it mutates. Sometimes it hardens into something colder, something that looks less like mourning and more like hunger. The streetlights flicker on like half-lit lanterns in a graveyard, casting long, trembling silhouettes that stretch across rain-slick pavement. Each puddle reflects a distorted sky, a mirror that shows not what is above but the jagged interior of my own thoughts. I move forward, the soles of my shoes pressing into cracked concrete as if trying to read the fissures for some hidden map. But the only chart I find is a network of ruptures that run parallel to the ache in my chest. The city around me hums with the ordinary noises of people who have never known the weight of a secret that gnaws from the inside. A couple hurries past, their laughter a thin ribbon that snaps against the wind, while a lone child darts between shop fronts, clutching a plastic balloon that sways like a fragile heartbeat. I watch them disappear into the fog of evening, their silhouettes swallowed by the gloom that has become my permanent companion. Their obliviousness is a quiet indictment. The world continues its indifferent march. Its neon arteries throb with electric life while I walk through the shadows of my own making. Every doorway I pass seems a resonance with memory I've already cataloged. The rusted gate of the warehouse where I once stacked broken mannequins, the cracked window of the apartment where the empty pill bottle once sat on the nightstand, the soot-stained railing of the bridge that offered a view of black water forever beckoning. Those places no longer exist as physical locations. They live now in the hollows of my mind, each a landmark on a topography composed entirely of loss. The wind that brushes my face carries a faint scent of jasmine, the perfume she used to wear, mingled with the acrid tang of rust and rain. The odor is both reminder and deception, a phantom that persuades me for a fleeting second that she might still be waiting somewhere behind the veil of night. The breath I draw becomes a mixture of memory and present, a cocktail that fuels the endless procession of thoughts that never truly settle. I pause beneath a street lamp whose bulb trembles, its light sputtering like a dying firefly. In the halo of its glow, I see the outline of a grave etched into the sidewalk, a shallow depression where an old man once fell and never rose. I kneel, my fingers tracing the ragged edge, feeling the cold stone beneath the surface. The gesture is absurd, a ritual borrowed from the past, yet it feels necessary a way to acknowledge the permanent imprint grief has left upon the ground beneath my feet. Rising, I hear the faint chorus of a distant siren, a sound that has become a metronome for my thoughts. It rises, fades, rises again, each wail a reminder that danger still lurks in places I cannot see, that the tenebrous gloom I carry is capable of swallowing more than just memories. The siren does not signal rescue. It merely punctuates the relentless night, a reminder that the world has no intention of pausing to hear my confession. I continue down the avenue, the rain now a steady drizzle, each drop a soft percussion on my coat. The droplets beat on the surface of my skin, then roll away, leaving behind a faint, shining trail that quickly disappears. They're like the fleeting moments of relief I have tasted, bright, cool, and inevitably fleeting. My coat is soaked through, its weight a constant pressure that clings to me like a second skin, the dampness seeping into my bones and making the cold feel more like an extension of my own hollowed interior. The words that once screamed inside my head have softened into a low, persistent hum, a frequency that I can almost tune out. When I stop, the hum rises, reminding me that even silence is layered with an undercurrent of accusation. I have learned not to fight it, for resistance only amplifies its presence. Instead, I walk with it, letting its vibration become part of the rhythm of my steps, an internal percussion that matches the rain-tapped pavement. A small park appears ahead, its benches empty, its trees bare, their branches reaching upward like skeletal fingers, asking the vacancy for something to grasp. I sit on a bench that creaks under my weight, the metal glinting dimly in the street lamp's halo. I open the notebook that has been my reluctant confessor. Its page is thick with the ink of my own admissions. I trace the final line I ever wrote. The night is my home. The dawn is a story told by others. The pen is heavy now, the ink thick as tar, and I let the nib rest on the page without adding another word. The notebook closes with soft thud, its silence louder than any scream I have ever unleashed. I slide it into my coat pocket, a reminder that some burdens are carried not because they must be shown, but because they are inseparable from the very flesh that bears them. Rising, I glance one last time at the park, at the skeletal trees, at the empty bench that has borne the weight of my solitude. The wind rustles once more, scattering a few leaves across the path, the leaves swirling like tiny specters before being swallowed by the tenebrous gloom. I step away, feeling each footfall as a deliberate act of moving forward despite the absence of any visible road. The city continues its throb, oblivious to the internal earthquake I navigate. My shadow stretches behind me, elongated, merging with the gloom that lines the alleyways, a second silhouette that follows without judgment. I do not look for companionship, there is none to be found. Only the reverberation of my own steps and the faint susurrus of distant traffic. As I pass beneath the bridge where the black water once threatened to claim me, the steel arches loom overhead, their rusted ribs forming a vaulted cathedral of neglect. The river below remains an inky ribbon that flows unseen, its surface still, reflecting nothing but the city's jaundiced glow. The bridge does not beckon now. It simply exists, a reminder of a choice that forever altered the course of my life. I cross it without hesitation, the metal cool against my palms, the boards beneath my feet steady despite the memory of that night. Reaching the far side, I find myself on a quiet residential street where houses line the road like tombstones, their windows dark, their doors locked. The air here smells faintly of damp earth and distant wood smoke, a scent that feels like a burial rite. I pause at the foot of a particular porch, its steps worn smooth by years of footfalls that were never mine. From the doorway, a dim light flickers a single bulb that has been left on for no apparent reason. I glance inside, see a dining table set for one, a single plate waiting, a glass of water half full. The scene is absurdly ordinary, yet it feels like an altar, a stage set for a performance I am no longer willing to play. I turn away, the light fading behind me as I close the gate behind my coat. The night is deeper here. The stars hidden behind a blanket of low clouds, the moon a faint crescent that barely cuts the shadow. I walk onward, my breath a steady fog that rises and dissipates, the rhythm of my heart a metronome that marks each step I take through this unending twilight. In the distance, a faint glimmer catches my eye, a billboard advertising a new beginning, its slogan promising tomorrow starts today. The words are a jarring contrast to the world I inhabit, a reminder that the market of hope still sells its wares to strangers who have never tasted the bitterness that now flavors my every breath. I pass it without stopping, the neon light reflecting off a puddle and breaking into 1,000 tiny shards, each one a fragment of an unfulfilled promise. My shoes splash through another shallow pool, the water rippling outward, each ripple a small resonance of the larger, unseen tide that has already reshaped the continents of my mind. I do not attempt to trace them, nor do I try to smooth them. I simply step over, letting the water return to its quiet state as quickly as the world can erase a small disturbance. The night continues to fall around me, the air growing colder, the wind sharper. Yet within me a quiet certainty has taken root. Grief is no longer a monster that attacks in the shadows. It is a terrain I've learned to navigate, a topographical feature that I have mapped with every scar, every memory, every breath. My steps may be heavy, my vision may be dimmed by the fog of the past, but I move forward nonetheless, because moving is the only act that confirms I have not turned into the static silence that once threatened to engulf me. I glance again at the city's silhouette on the horizon, a jagged line of steel and glass that gleams faintly even under the oppressive night. The lights below twinkle like distant fireflies, indifferent, alive, unburdened by the weight of my inner funeral. The world does not pause for my sorrow. It breathes, it expands, it contracts, it continues. And I, a solitary figure threading my way through its streets, have come to accept that my grief will forever be the underbrush, the mist, the uneven ground on which my journey unfolds. I tighten my coat against the wind, lift my chin, and allow the night to swallow my silhouette once more. The path ahead is unseen, the future uncharted, but the steps remain. The landscape of my loss stretches infinitely, yet I walk it alone, bearing the weight of a blackness that has become familiar as my own shadow. It does not vanish. It merely reconfigures itself into the very ground beneath my feet, a terrain I now recognize, a terrain I will forever traverse. The night is endless, the road unending, and I continue, each footfall a quiet affirmation that I am still here, still moving, still alive enough to feel the ache, still present enough to own the landscape that grief has become. The end.